Sometime around 1999 or 2000, my brother was collecting Nightwing comics. He was a huge fan of the character, primarily thanks to his appearances on the Batman animated series. He took these comics, bagged and boarded them, and tacked them on his walls. Mostly it was to cover up the crappy blue seashell-themed wallpaper in his room, but he'd still take the comics down and read them. And he would let me read them too. I had not read many comics before, just the occasional one I found here and there. Anything I knew about superheroes came from cartoons or from word of mouth. That's how I had heard about stuff like the Clone Saga, even though I had never actually read a single issue of it. It was in Nightwing Secret Files and Origins #1 where I was first exposed to a team that Dick Grayson, age whatever, had been a part of. The Teen Titans. Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. However, for the month of March, we will not be looking at the worst comics ever made. We will be looking at the superhero team that got me interested in reading comic books. We'll see the ups and downs of that team, and why I seem to care about them in spite of all the crap that's happened with them throughout their long history. Welcome to March of the Titans. So let's get some stuff out of the way that I know some people are going to be grumbling about. 1. These episodes are not going to be my funniest. This is not about me telling jokes, but I'll try to inject humor where I can. This is about me relaying my personal history and passions as a fan of a particular comic series. A series that got me to open my eyes and explore an entire medium of storytelling. Sure, I'll tell jokes, but that's only because I'm a snarky bastard. 2. No, I'm not talking about the animated series. Yes, the animated series is great, but again, that's not what we're here to discuss. We're talking about 50 issues of a particular comic series. If you're passionate about the animated series, or any other series, tell other people about it in your own way. No, we're talking about the team that began in 1999 and ended in 2002. The team that wasn't new and it wasn't teens, they were just the Titans. And that brings us to number 3. I'm not going to talk about what came after it. Jeff Johns' 2003 Teen Titans book was all fine and good, but that isn't my favorite incarnation of the team, and there's a lot about it that I disliked, owing either to really stupid character development or him feeling the need to retcon elements of character motivation and history to fit his own view of how things should work. It was still enjoyable, sure, but it isn't the book that made me the hat-wearing, comic-reviewing, don't care about no movies cause they ain't no comics-loving guy that you all see today. However, The Titans as a book was always one that embraced its varied history, always tried to move the characters into the next stages of their lives, and not just be, well, let's reboot everything in 10 years and hope nobody complains. That's why I started this series of videos to begin with. The 2011 reboot, despite originally hinting that there were Teen Titans teams before, has now gone out of its way to say that their team is the first to ever be called the Teen Titans. And as a fan of what has come before, it is offensive to me and to its 40-plus years of history. But before we can get to my favorite book, we need to talk about the team and what has come before. This week, we'll be taking a broad look at the history of the Titans up until next week's feature, a mini-series called the Technis Imperative. So let's dig into the history of the Teen Titans and figure out just who the hell these people are. Seen the very first appearance of the group back in Brave and the Bold number 54. We've also looked at a Christmas issue wherein they reenacted A Christmas Carol. poorly, but what else did the series have to offer? Were there other members, or was it just the Fab Five? Who were the villains they fought? Well, let's go all the way back to 1966 with the original comic series, the first issue of which they fought the Beast God of Xochitl. And people say I hate the Silver Age. How can I hate the Silver Age when there is a comic that features the Beast God of Xochitl? Albeit one way is to force me to turn the opening splash page on its side in order to read the text. Damn it, 1966! I thought that was more of a thing in the 90s to be forced to turn a comic on its side and take you out of the story. They're here, those kids with the superhero beat. I prefer the superhero turnip myself. Fighting, battling. One would say those two are the same thing. Daring, dashing, and even thinking. Teenagers thinking? What new spore of madness is this? Not only does their first outing have them fighting a giant conquistador statue and joining the Peace Corps, but they also briefly fight Killdozer. Awesome! In the second issue, they established more details about the team, like how they would get calls for help from teenagers, they operated out of a cave, later called the Titan's Lair, and their vehicle was a big helicopter with the words Teen Titans written across it. Because, well, even teenagers need to secure their brand name. It also featured Wonder Girl tying her ponytail around a tree and having all the other Titans hanging from her leg.
Give me a hand with hair, long beautiful hair.
For those of you only familiar with the animated series, a lot of the goofier villains featured there actually got their start here. For example, Ding Dong Daddy and the Mad Mod. Both characters that make a hell of a lot more sense in the 60s than they did in the early 2000s, but what you gonna do? Mad Mod, by the way, will be making a reappearance later on, but we'll get to that. Another weird one was also in Roy Harper's first comic featuring the team, an international organization dedicated to hate and distrust. Diablo!
Stay a while and listen.
Speaking of guest stars, future Teen Titans regular Beast Boy, renamed Changeling and then Beast Boy again later, even had an issue where he guest starred, trying to join the team because the Doom Patrol wouldn't let him actively engage in missions because he needed parents' permission. The Titans turned him down for the same reason, which is just laughable considering you have to imagine Robin pleading with Batman to join the team like he was pleading to attend a concert. You just don't understand me, Batman! Why won't you let me join the Teen Titans? No, I know what you teenagers do when you get together. You sit and listen to rock and roll, don't you? Don't you? A lot of this stuff was weird, but weird in that awesome comic book kind of way, despite questionable science. For example, when the teens go up against a vigilante group who want to tar and feather some foreign exchange students, the Titans fight them and Wonder Girl lifts up two guys. Sort of. Yikes, we're going up! Can't let go, we're stuck! You should know I can make my wrist bracelets magnetic by just willing it. And of course, I can make them non-magnetic just as easily by unwilling it.
And if your hands were metal, that would mean something.
I notice that no one ever brings that up when talking about Donna Troy's confusing backstory. And remember how in the Christmas Carol comic there was that ad for the Adam West Batman series? Yeah, that wasn't the only time that happened. They actually hide their helicopter behind a giant billboard advertising the show, and we see it a few times in the series. Said billboard keeps changing the look of the ad too. One particular issue of note for the upcoming look at the Titan series itself would be issue 14. It's actually a really damn good story, and the mood is radically different from most of the rest of the series. In it, a criminal called the Gargoyle claims that one of the Titans withheld evidence that would have proved him innocent in a crime, and he swears vengeance. However, it's actually a ploy to make the Titans distrust each other and fill their minds with negative thoughts. All of the suspicion lies on Robin, and when the other Titans hesitate to follow his orders, the Gargoyle sends them to a limbo dimension where they're his evil servants. The media thinks the other Titans are dead, and it's not exactly a far-off idea from what they're actually happening, and Robin has to face criminals on his own and find a way to defeat the Gargoyle too. While it still contains lots of 60s era dialogue and references to both the Beatles and the Monkees, it's a rather dark story compared to the rest, especially when you consider that the following issue has the Titans going to Hippie Town, USA to defend said hippies from a biker named Captain Rumble and disguising themselves as hippies. It's about as authentic as this. Like, peace, man. We be groovy cats up in this pad. It would be later explained that the gargoyle was none other than Mr. Twister from the Brave and the Bold issue that's considered the first Teen Titans appearance. He had been transformed into the gargoyle thanks to another freaky-ass villain called Antithesis, who was later retconned as the first villain the Titans fought together. Comics are confusing. Speaking of, I bet you fans of the animated series love Starfire, right? Well, want to see Starfire's first appearance? Here he is! Oh, wait, you mean the alien princess. Yeah, we'll get to her in a bit. No, the original Starfire is this kid, a Russian superhero. To avoid confusion later on with that Starfire, he was renamed to Red Star and even joined the team for a time during the New Teen Titans run. Other guest stars who would be on-again, off-again Titans included the duo Hawk and Dove, whose successors would also be members at one time or another. As the book progressed, notable changes in the writing style did occur, particularly after Bob Haney stopped being the only writer. While the pseudo-jive talk persisted in some ways, the overall style of things began to resemble the Bronze Age of comics, featuring less single-panel openers that teased of a future event in the book and more continuous action. Panel arrangement varied from the standards, and the art was more experimental in places. Hell, they even began to have multiple issues with a continuous story, including one featuring interdimensional aliens from an earlier issue. Speedy became a permanent member of the team, while Aqualad became more of a guest star, no doubt because they were having trouble figuring out what the hell to do with him, since he's a water-based character. Wonder Girl's origin was finally explained in a backup story. Remember, she was a character who was created by accident. And in keeping with that, a tradition was started in which every time Donna's origin was rewritten, something new would be altered about the character, usually her costume or her powers. In universe, well, here's why she decides to switch costumes. I think this might be a good time to get around to making a new costume. I was getting tired of that old one, and it was getting kinda raunchy. Getting kind of raunchy? If you don't count the cape, you technically wear more clothes than Robin. The new Wonder Girl. How about that, Tigers? Great costume, but I think you're confusing yourself with Mary Jane Watson. Be careful, Donna, or else Satan will erase your future marriage from history too. Issue 25 introduced a new Titan to the group named Lilith, a go-go dancer who has psychic abilities, although mostly precognition. After an incident where a well-known peace advocate is killed, she introduces them to the richest man on Earth, a man named Lauren Jupiter, who brings in the Titans to be a peacekeeping force to teach teenagers about the world they're going to inherit when they grow up. Robin leaves the group because he wants to continue his studies in college, and the others decide to pursue the mission without costumes and powers while living in an unlisted floor of a building run by robots and swear off any kind of violence. Yeah, that doesn't last long, but it is really damn weird. They're joined by another future superhero named Mal Duncan and get subliminal instruction from Mr. Jupiter on how to pilot a rocket to Venus. Did I mention that this part of the series was really damn weird? For crying out loud, they go to the moon as a stopping point before they head to Venus! And I'm here alone, 1/4 miles from Earth. I know I shouldn't, but I can't keep from shivering. It's cold as the grave here. It's frightening.
Relax, we're on the moon. What could possibly go wrong?
I suppose it does make sense to a certain degree. This was only a few months after the moon landing. A lot of advertisements of the comic also had space themes and model kits recreating the lunar lander and such. But still, it's a big what the hell for a comic that only a short time ago had featured the hippie town. Like I said, though, they dropped the no costumes or powers thing fairly quickly, mostly with Aqualad telling them to get their sorry asses back in gear. This involves a plot by Aquaman's nemesis Ocean Master teaming up with aliens. We're up against a group of aliens, creatures from outer space! From outer space? Aw, come on, you've gotta be kidding! Only 2 weeks ago, you were on the moon! And you met aliens! Mr. Jupiter remained around to finance the team, but it was more traditional superhero stuff, or at least the heroes bumbling into situations, until the book was cancelled with issue number 43, but revived a few years later and continued its numbering, despite the fact that within the book, as far as they were concerned, they had split up for 2 years. They're brought together again by a false distress call made by Dr. Light, who makes quick work of the team. What's most noticeable about this era is that the group is more willing to fight with each other. It's something that's brought up in the Titans series. They're a family in all the good ways, in that they'll always be there for each other, support one another, and be the first people to turn to in bad situations. But they're also a family in the worst way. Everything is much more personal with them, so small problems can escalate into bigger ones rather quickly, and it makes it that much harder to do things apart from the family. In this situation, though, it gives Mal Duncan the chance to finally step into his own. Dr. Light kidnaps all the other Titans except for Mal, who is left with the storage area of the Titans' lair, which has spare costumes and equipment from the Titans. Mal has actually had a few different identities, including his first one here, taking the look of another hero called the Guardian. In the next issue, he acquired Gabriel's horn and took on the identity of the Hornblower. Seriously. And this is his costume. Again. Seriously. You know what the really sad thing about that costume is? Both this incarnation of the team and the 2011 reboot of the team could desperately use some blue in their color scheme. Fortunately, he only sported that for a single issue before reverting to the Guardian again. Other heroes got introduced in the book too, including Mal's girlfriend Karen, who became Bumblebee. Also, Joker's daughter. Long story there, and it's not important. She's better known as Dwella Dent, who you might remember as being the first victim of Countdown. You want more weirdness? Instead of continuing to operate out of the cave with all their equipment and stuff, they instead decide to build and operate a restaurant/disco. Yes, really. In the 50th issue, they introduced a concept that's never really taken off despite several attempts: Teen Titans West. It's actually a team book tradition that sometimes the roster will expand to the point where a second version of a group will be running around. The Justice League did it with both Justice League International and Justice League Europe. The Avengers had just the Avengers, and then Avengers West Coast. And then there was the Justice Society and JSA All-Stars. With the Titans, the West Coast branch, and in one case, the East Coast branch, never really took off despite repeated attempts to make it work. So who made up this team? Well, Beast Boy, Hawk and Dove, Lilith, and 2 newcomers, sort of. There's Golden Eagle, who was Hawkman's kinda sorta protege, and then there was Batgirl. No, not that one. No, not that one. This one. Okay, I've briefly talked about Frederick Wortham, whose book Seduction of the Innocent suggested that Batman and Robin were in a gay relationship. Remember, this was the 1950s, so that was a big no-no. As a counter to this, DC created the characters of Batwoman and Batgirl to show that they were totally not gay and so wanted to bang these brightly colored distaff counterparts. To be fair, both characters got a better shake in modern times, with Batwoman becoming an ass-kicking crime fighter lesbian, rather ironic given her character history, while Batgirl, aka Betty Kane, was reinvented years later as Flamebird, a Robin fangirl who wanted to be a crime fighter, but kept getting told by Robin, and later Nightwing, that she wasn't cut out for it. She then reinvented herself, got a badass new attitude, and surprisingly was one of the characters who survived the 2011 reboot. Anyway, the 70 series came to an end with issue 53 due to low sales, where we learn a revised version of the team's origin, as well as the team members all going their separate ways. This would all work out for the better, though, since it led to what was probably the most successful run of the team. 1980 witnessed the debut of the New Teen Titans, written by Marv Wolfman and drawn by George Perez. And naturally, the first issue was a collector's item, despite the lack of Mr. T trading card. Although, to be fair, Mr. T was not well known at this point. However, I would suggest that the awesomeness of Mr. T would transcend time itself. Strangely enough, the book begins with an epilogue. Not sure how the hell that works, but it features the alien woman named Coriander, aka Starfire, breaking free of Gordanian slavers and stealing a ship that will bring her to Earth. The Titans themselves are brought together by Raven, a mysterious woman with empathic powers. She convinces Dick Grayson to reunite the Titans, and even uses her powers to convince Kid Flash to come out of retirement by making him think he's in love with her. Yeah, Raven was kind of a jerk. She brought the team together to stop an interdimensional demon from coming through to Earth, but neglected to tell everybody that the demon, Trigon, was her father. So when evil was sensed within her, they thought she was pulling a fast one on them. I exaggerate a little, but that's basically what happened. Beast Boy became a permanent member of the team, and there was still one final member, Victor Stone, aka Cyborg. He was a teenager with Olympic aspirations, but his father, a brilliant but neglectful scientist, accidentally caused an accident that severely injured him. His father replaced most of his body with cybernetic enhancements. Because he's a scientist in a work of fiction, he's proficient in all scientific fields. In addition, seeing what a good influence the Titans would be on him, Cyborg's father constructed the most memorable headquarters for the group, Titans Tower, located on an island off the coast of New York. It's a huge building in the shape of a T. I love it. Now, I mentioned Trigon a minute ago, but let's talk about some of the other villains for a second. Dr. Light assembled a group of other villains and called themselves the Fearsome Five, and they actually managed to score some decent hits on the team, even almost brainwashing them into killing the Justice League. They were a recurring threat over the years, but the one that stands out to this day, to the point where for some inexplicable reason he got his own solo book in the reboot, is Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke the Terminator. Deathstroke was a mercenary and assassin, enhanced by experiments in the military to increase his mental and physical discipline. He had a wife, Adeline, and two sons, Joseph and Grant. When a rival group tried to threaten his family's lives to get information about his clients, Deathstroke thought he was fast enough to save them. And he kind of was. The guy who was holding a knife to Joseph's throat didn't kill him, but he did sever his vocal cords. Adeline, naturally pissed off about this, and a former military officer herself, shot Slade in her rage. Personally, I would have considered couples counseling before moving into the homicidal rage, but that's just me. However, he survived, only losing his eye from the attack. A criminal organization, and a recurring threat to the Titans, known as the Hive, tried to hire Deathstroke to kill the Titans, but he refused because they wouldn't pay him in advance. In turn, the Hive then tried to kill him. Deathstroke is a frequent submitter to the website Clients from Hell. Naturally, he was unfazed by the effort, but the Hive instead took Slade's son Grant and tried to replicate the enhancements that Deathstroke had and have him kill the Titans. He did gain powers, but the Hive kinda botched the whole thing, and Grant was killed after he fought the Titans. Deathstroke, being kind of an asshole, blamed the Titans for his death instead of, the guys actually responsible for his death, and took the contract to kill the Titans. And thus began the long game as Deathstroke planned and plotted, occasionally engaging the Titans before he executed his gambit, the Judas Contract. The Titans brought in a superpowered girl named Terra, who had been used by some crooks to further their own schemes. Terra was a mite full of herself, but otherwise seemed normal to the others. However, the truth was far worse. Those of you familiar with the animated series are most likely in the know about the tragedy of the character of Terra. But things were a bit different in the comics. In the animated series, Terra was a girl who had trouble controlling her powers and was brought on by Slade to betray the team, but ultimately she turned on him and was going to join the forces of good before she got turned to stone, and then reappeared in one of the most frustrating and annoying finales ever for a kids' show. In the comics, Terra was a monster. Plain and simple. She was a sociopath and a sadist, and she was only 14 years old. She played with the emotions of the Titans and happily betrayed them to Deathstroke and the Hive, learning all of their weaknesses and even their secret identities. When she thought that Deathstroke had turned on her, she went nuts and basically killed herself in her rage, buried under a pile of earth that she had created. Oh yeah, and she also slept with Deathstroke. I did mention she was 14 years old, right? The Judas Contract is one of the best storylines of the series, and introduced not only a new Titan, but debuted Dick Grayson as Nightwing, featuring the all-powerful disco collar costume. And the new team member? None other than Deathstroke's other son, Joseph, now mute because of his severed vocal cords. As far as I know, I'm pretty sure Joseph, going by the name Jericho, was actually the first superhero who spoke in sign language. He was a gentle soul through and through, compassionate and loving. Also, the enhancements that his father had been given passed on to him in a new way. Jericho had the ability to possess other people if he made eye contact with a person, controlling their body. After all of that, Deathstroke actually opted to retire. Mostly. He came back several times throughout the rest of the book, and in the early 90s he got his own spin-off book and sort of became DC's answer to the Punisher. I don't know how long his solo series lasted, but I'm pretty sure it actually endured for quite a while, and he even had another kid, a daughter named Rose. We'll be getting back to her later, of course. But wait! Wasn't there a reason why the Titans were formed in the first place? Oh yeah! That interdimensional demon who wants to, you guessed it, take over the world.
Of course!
Raven was raised by a society of pacifists and mystics in a place called Azarath, who taught her to control her emotions, lest the evil within her be unleashed and she'd be Trigon's pawn. Raven's mother, Arella, aided the Titans against Trigon as best as she could, though obviously things did not go well. The Titans fought Trigon early in their tenure, and got their asses kicked. Severely. The new Teen Titans got relaunched as part of a DC initiative called Hardcover Softcover, wherein books would first be printed on much nicer material and then reprinted months later in standard material, and the first storyline for the Titans was Trigon's return and conquest of the Earth. Over the course of the series, Raven had interacted less and less with the team and began wearing her hood 24/7, her appearance looking more and more sickly and gaunt until she disappeared, Jericho experiencing a vision of Trigon's coming. As a storm begins to gather around New York City, the Titans bring in Lilith in the hopes that her psychic abilities will help them locate Raven. Yeah, that doesn't go well. Raven is completely under Trigon's will, acting as his herald before he arrives, and Earth is completely overrun by Trigon's power. And take a look at this, because hot damn, this is creepy stuff. Tendrils of people encompassing everything, the ground itself forming hands that clutch buildings. This is horror material right here, people. This is the kind of stuff that should be talked about on Longbox of the Damned. Not even the Titans are immune to this. Here, look at this. You may begin screaming.
It's official. Definitely having nightmares tonight.
Fortunately, the people of Azarath planned for all of this and set up a little scheme that would help Raven and the Titans destroy Trigon once and for all. At least until a stupid opening arc of Judd Winnick's Titans book. And of course, in a book like this, there were repercussions. There was major media attention on the group after they had saved the world, their tower had been destroyed, and Raven was presumed dead or at the very least missing. The Titans themselves experienced their worst fears and weren't certain what that really meant for them. But enough about emotional crises or demonic creatures intent on taking over the world. Did the joke already. Let's talk about romance. It was established pretty early on that both Dick Grayson and Starfire had a thing for each other. However, Donna Troy had a romance with a non-powered guy, Terry Long, who a lot of people really hate because they found him kind of creepy and pervy, which is really odd to me. He was apparently not Donna's teacher, so it's not like he was dating a student. Yes, there was a 10-year age gap between them, but they were both legal. He was a divorcee, and he was normal. In fact, that was probably his biggest sin. He was just a regular guy, and there wasn't a lot of drama other than him occasionally being in danger, which was just a subversion of the trope of male heroes defending non-powered female love interests. And honestly, despite the problem of a lack of drama, I actually liked that. I liked that a superhero and a normal person could get together and get married, and she didn't just end up with another superhero because that's what's expected. Speaking of their marriage, you want to know something else different for the time? The wedding issue of the two had no interruptions by supervillains. No big massive drama caused by evildoers, no interruptions to fight crime. The two just get married, and the drama is character stuff, like Beast Boy arranging for an illusion to be cast over Cyborg so people see him as normal for those who don't know the Titans' identities, and Cyborg being pissed about it. And of course, new characters were introduced as time went on, with less than stellar results. First up was a crystal spinner named Cole, who sadly was created solely to die. You see, Crisis on Infinite Earths was coming up, and since so many creators were giving up characters to die in the event, Marv Wolfman felt the need to do the same with a character of his own creation. He later regretted the decision, but yeah, she was killed in Crisis only a short time after she debuted. The other, however, is probably the most loathed, despised, and irritating character in the entirety of the Teen Titans. Nobody liked him, nobody respected him, and he was shuffled off the team rather unceremoniously to tie into events happening in the Batman books at the time. His name was Danny Chase. Danny Chase. Danny Chase is my favorite superhero of all time. And he's my favorite member of the Titans. I am not kidding at all. I love the little brat. It's admittedly hard to describe what it is about a teenage kid with telekinetic powers who's absolutely full of himself that I love so much, but it's probably because of his potential. Maybe I see a bit of myself in him, with a massive ego, but a deep desire to do good in the world. Danny Chase really got the shaft. He was the son of 2 secret agents, he made snide comments at every opportunity, was rather ungrateful, fainted at the sight of blood. Readers didn't react well to him, which is sad because clearly there was character development that had yet to be tapped. The Titans graphic novel games gave him a much better send-off than he actually got in the main series, and that was printed 2 decades after he died. Oh yeah, Danny Chase died. We'll get into that. Danny was created for the team primarily because the creative staff was realizing that, well, the Titans were growing up. If they weren't in their 20s yet, they were at least coming close, so it was felt it would be a good idea to actually have some teens in a group called the Teen Titans. And at some point it was decided that they were no longer the Teen Titans anyway, but the New Titans, and the name was changed accordingly. Subsequently, by the time the 50th issue came out, it was time to give a new origin to Donna Troy because Crisis on Infinite Earths had rewritten Wonder Woman's history in the DCU, meaning her and the Amazons' involvement in her origin was no longer valid. Now, she was recruited at a young age along with a few aliens by the Titans of Myth to be a kind of second coming of the gods. When the storyline concluded, she got a new costume and a new codename, Troya. Troya happens to be my favorite name for her. It just sounds cool. Oh, and then Dick kicked Danny Chase out of the Titans. Yeah, it does actually make sense in universe. When the Titans return from space, and of course they were in space, Dick learns the news that Jason Todd has been killed, so he kicked Danny out of the group to try to protect him. Fat load of good it did! In my opinion, the beginning of the end of the team actually came 60 issues before the final one. Now, of course, you can feel free to disagree with me on that, but in my mind, things were doomed with the coming of the Titans Hunt storyline. Basically, Marv Wolfman and the rest of the creative team felt that things were getting stale in the book, that they had a status quo and they wanted to shake it up. And that's good. At least they waited until they actually had a status quo before they tried to mix things up a bit. The major companies could take a lesson there instead of having event comic lead into event comic leading into another event comic. The problem, as always, is in the execution, which is a rather apt word for this storyline. It lasted 13 issues, killed off a whole bunch of characters, and gave half of the remaining characters mullets. Okay, for a while now, a villain named the Wildebeest has been stalking and fighting the Titans, even infiltrating pretty close to them at times, as we see that he has multiple disguises, and no one is certain of who he is or what his motives are other than evil. And thus begins the Titans Hunt, wherein every former member of the team is hunted and either captured or killed by the Wildebeest. Steve Dayton, former member of the Doom Patrol and Beast Boy's guardian, calls in Deathstroke to find out what happened. Deathstroke is all too eager to help since his son was taken too, and quickly discovers that there is more than one wildebeest running around. Because that revelation ended up working out so well for the Clone Saga. And to be fair, the Titans hunt actually starts off really damn well. There's a real sense of excitement and intrigue as the Titans are taken and we follow Deathstroke as he tries to put everything together. But then the cliches of the time start kicking in. Mysterious new characters, complicated revelations that turn good guys evil, mullets. Want the full story? Okay, get this. Jericho is actually the wildebeest. He got possessed by the spirits of Azarath, Raven's people, who drove him mad and want to take over the world by possessing people's bodies or something. They repaired his vocal cords and he took over the Wildebeest Society from the original Wildebeest. Meanwhile, the Wildebeests think they killed Danny Chase, but Dick Grayson, having infiltrated the society, sends word to him to hide and work in the shadows, thus he creates the awesomely cool identity Phantasm. The society, also performing genetic experiments to create bodies for the souls of Azarath, create a baby wildebeest creature and genetically modify a woman to become Pantha, although her backstory is only discovered after she's already dead, thank you Jeff Johns. Jericho loads Cyborg into a rocket, which explodes, and while he survives, he becomes a vegetable, his body upgraded to contain even more cybernetic components. Titan's Tower is destroyed, again, and during all of this, we also have a mysterious group of Titans from the future called the Team Titans, who are trying to kill Donna Troy because they think her son is going to grow up to become an evil dictator who... I hope you're starting to see what the problem is here. Shaking up the status quo is one thing, but this story is just too complicated. There's too much to take in and absorb, and it never lets up, never lets you catch your breath. On top of that, the Team Titans, the ones from the future, they're not only a byproduct of a storyline that the book hasn't gotten to yet, but also of a crossover event occurring in DC at the time called Armageddon 2001. I've mentioned that one before concerning Captain Atom becoming the supervillain Monarch from Countdown. You see what I mean when I say I can track every bad comic out there somehow back to Countdown? If that wasn't enough, they even had a tie-in to a Wonder Woman event called War of the Gods. Simply put, however the original Titans Hunt idea would have progressed, it just became a mess. Deathstroke is forced to kill his son in the hope of stopping the souls of Azarath, but he's too late. The souls start possessing the other Titans until they're combined into Raven. Nightwing wants everyone to flee, but Danny Chase and Raven's mother say they have to stop the souls there or else the souls will just follow them back to Earth. The two sacrifice themselves to stop the souls, which then kinda sorta coagulate with the two and become a new Phantasm, who's just mysterious and boring and crap. It's another reason why Danny is my favorite. The kid willingly sacrificed himself to save the world. And does he get a statue in Titan's Tower when the 2003 series comes around? Oh no! We need to give a statue to the psychopath who betrayed the team! That works too, I guess! Only 2 or 3 of the Team Titans actually survive everything, so they're the only ones I'll bring up. Mirage, who has the power to cast illusions, and Terra. Yeah, Terra. Terra 2 is a whole mess in and of herself, and I'm not going to get into that. Only to say that she is and she isn't the original Terra. Mirage, being Nightwing's lover in the alternate future, disguises herself as Starfire and sleeps with him a whole lot. And goody! Since having sex with someone under false pretenses is also rape, that means that Dick Grayson has actually been raped by 2 women before. Seriously, that happened in his solo series too. She also gets him a new costume, which is okay. I prefer the disco collar myself. That leads into a storyline appropriately called Total Chaos, a crossover with Deathstroke series and the newly launched Team Titans book that brings the storyline about Donna Troy's son to conclusion. We're not going to cover Team Titans because it honestly has little to no effect on this stuff. What I will say is that Donna voluntarily gives up her superhuman abilities and invites the Team Titans to live on a ranch she and her husband own while they try to raise her son. The end result of all of this is that Terry Long divorces her and takes the son away. They get unceremoniously killed off in Wonder Woman's book in a car crash. Why? Because John Byrne didn't care about Donna's supporting cast, and DC Editorial wanted Donna in a relationship with Kyle Rayner, no matter how much sense is actually made with that. We'll talk about this some more in a few episodes. The main point, of course, in this is that editorial mandates have always been a problem in this industry and are not just a recent phenomenon. Total Chaos is mostly just everyone fighting each other and being annoying. The pacing sucks, the characterization sucks, and the story itself is far too long at 9 parts spread out over 3 books. Also, they introduced this guy as a new member of the Team Titans. His name is Battalion. He is Rob Liefeld's wet dream. If you ever thought the early 90s were only bad for the first Image comics, behold what was going on in mainstream books. Speaking of, that brings us to another thing about these comics, and a lot of other comics, that I find utterly frustrating. You know how there are movies out there that won't shut the hell up? You know the kinds of movies, they feel the need to inject noise and dialogue into every single second of film so that you never get a break, never get a chance to slow down. Yeah, comics can have that too. There will be long bits where we have about a dozen characters in a room, someone's trying to give exposition or they're trying to figure out a plan of attack, but everyone starts yapping and yapping. Everyone puts in annoying dialogue or snarky remarks or talking about events that we've already seen, and that usually leads to the characters fighting each other for no real reason. These comics are full of that kind of thing. If you're engrossed in a comic, you hear the dialogue in your head without realizing it. The voices of the characters are speaking, for lack of a better word. But in comics like this, where it's just constant dialogue, never stopping, never giving us quiet moments, it's just pure and utter noise. It feels like as if someone went up to your ear and just started going, beep, and they would never stop. You just want everybody to shut up. So what happened next? Well, Raven survived the previous encounter, sort of, by basically being overtaken by the demonic essence of Trigon, and in turn started plotting to put Trigon seeds in various people to take over the world or something. She interrupts the attempted wedding of Dick Grayson and Starfire, which really went to show how far the comic had gotten off the rails, considering the last wedding they had avoided this cliche. Also, Raven is now dressed like this. Remember, kids, when you become evil, your body temperature rises rapidly, and thus you need to wear less clothing. Unless you have a Y chromosome, in which case you wear more clothes. So after the wedding is ruined, Roy Harper, who is now an agent of a government organization called Checkmate, is ordered to take command of the Titans and make them work for the government. This was another problem with the book at the time. Storylines would be brought up and then get forgotten about for another 10 issues, even though it was clearly supposed to be leading somewhere originally. The stuff with Raven is sidelined, Phantasm reappears without any explanation, even though he was killed by Evil Raven, and we start a plot about getting Cyborg back to normal. And it's confusing as all hell, I must say, not helped by increasingly awful artwork. Check out this battle between Arsenal and Nightwing. Why is Nightwing wearing normal pants? Not a clue. This particular artist just had them randomly wearing half-civilian clothing. Anyway, back to the confusing Cyborg storyline. Beings of light appear and take him after they've taken on the appearance of members of a supervillain team called the Brotherhood of Evil. Why did they assume those forms? I really have no idea. They say they're representatives of something called Technis, and the story is... I have no idea. I had to go to TitansTower.com later on to figure out what the hell is happening in the storyline, and they really summarize it down. I have never known less about what is going on in a comic. This makes less sense than the Silent Hill Dead Alive comics. Those were nonsensical, yes, but mostly because character motivations and backstory are simply assumed, and it feels like panels have been cut out of it. However, you could get the general gist of what was happening if you really looked hard enough. This is just, I don't know, it's like they're over-explaining everything. Okay, so there's this thing called Technis, which is apparently a planet, but not just a planet, but also a race of beings. Except it's actually only two beings, brothers or something, except there used to be a sister, but something happened to the sister in an issue of Swamp Thing, and they only mention the Swamp Thing connection like 2 or 3 issues into it, and they want Cyborg because he has a human soul or something, and they tried to reactivate him, only it didn't work, so they instead decided to create holograms of people that Beast Boy knew for no real reason, because they can read minds, and they needed technology for no reason, except they don't really, and when the Titans come on board Technis, which is also pure energy and pure data or something, they keep getting into fights and then immediately stop fighting, and Technis is dying because of stagnation or degradation or something, and they want to take over the world, and I don't know. What?
It is more suspenseful when you don't know what's going on.
To be fair, by part 4 of the story, they actually finally seem to explain what the hell's going on, but honestly, it takes so long to do so, and it's so weird and complicated that I don't feel the need to explain it. Tell me if I'm wrong, but doesn't this sound like some kind of David Lynch movie? No, if this was David Lynch, there would be a lot more rabbits speaking nonsensically while a laugh track played. And I haven't laughed once during this. The end result of this is that Cyborg volunteers to join with the Technis and heads out into space with it, even transforming into an entirely digital being called Siberian. In the wake of all the shenanigans, most of the team leaves save for Beast Boy and Arsenal, who gets a better looking costume, but still a lame one. The events of 0 Hour occur and the new team is forged, with Mirage and Terra of the Team Titans joining up along with a new character, Damage, who had his own series. Barry Allen's grandson from the future named Impulse, Green Lantern Kyle Rayner, and a returning Donna Troy, who joined up with a Green Lantern-like organization called the Dark Stars and got a new costume and codename, also joined up. Some of these guys would be Titans for about 5 minutes, something else that seems to happen with regularity, unfortunately, but more so is another new character who sadly never really got a chance to be explored too much, Jarrus Minion. Minion, like Superman, is the last survivor of an alien species. The difference being that he doesn't look human, he's a teenager, and instead of gaining power from the sun, he instead has a techno-organic war suit called the Omegadrome that his father had created to overcome an instinctive desire among his people for pacifism. And hell, I only bring him up because he's going to have an effect on the story in next week's episode. This era of the Titans is chaotic, weird, and badly drawn. Well, some of it is badly drawn. They seem to be having trouble keeping regular artists and regular team members on the books at the time, and the characters are just jumping into crossovers or events that had nothing to do with them without any rhyme or reason. Supergirl apparently joins up with the Titans for a bit, same as Deathstroke's daughter Rose, whom I mentioned before. The Raven storyline gets resolved unceremoniously with her group of evil Trigon Seed-infested Titans just kinda getting beaten by Phantasm, who even gets a few pages explaining his resurrection, after he had already appeared in the book at least a dozen times after his supposed death. Oh, and all the evil Trigon Seed-infested characters get dark makeovers, like Beast Boy swaps out the white in his costume for black, and Supergirl gets completely unnecessary spiked wrist armor. Evil! It's a thing with superhero comics. When a hero is turned villainous, they immediately need to change their wardrobe to reflect their new status as evil. Black outfits, spikes, blades, all that fun stuff that looks completely impractical, but if they didn't wear it, we wouldn't understand that they were evil. So how did the series actually end? Well, in a 4-parter called Meltdown, Cyborg, or Siberian as it were, returns to Earth while assisting Starfire, wearing an even more revealing outfit than usual, and her once evil sister, who became evil again later. Comics are complicated. They discover that Changeling is still under the effects of the Trigon Seed and decide to bring him back to Starfire's homeworld of Tamaran. But unfortunately, they're having problems of their own, and an attacking force, well, blows up Tamaran. Okay, seriously, how many friggin' people in the DC universe have had their planets blow up now? Raven evidently survived the previous battle and is now working to finalize her plans with the Trigon Seeds thanks to the ones surviving in Changeling. However, it turns out the good part of her soul was implanted into Starfire when she made out with her in issue 100. Oh yeah, that happened. Apparently you transfer evil demon seeds, or just good souls, by kissing people, and her kissing Starfire saved her good half. Hooray for lesbianism! She destroys the Technis, although Siberian survives, and the Titans engage her one final time, purifying her soul so that she no longer has a physical body, but she's gold now, so think of her as a mystical Johnny 5 or something. And that's pretty much it for the team. There's no official disbanding in it, although a lot of the members go their separate ways, and a 16-year run comes to a close. Siberian decides to honor the Technis' memory by fulfilling their mission of cataloging information, and a changeling goes along with him, while Raven remains behind with Starfire as she starts building a new Tamaran. As for everyone else, well, I guess they just kinda got bored and left. There's one last book we need to talk about before we close out this team history, and that would be the 24-issue Teen Titans book from 1996, made by the ever-awesome Dan Jurgens. Rather than trying to continue directly on, this would be an original team, but with connections to the past and the DC Universe as a whole. For starters, they were assisted by our old great disaster-stopping pal Ray Palmer, who at this point in the DC Universe, he had been regressed to a teenager, but with an adult mind. The premise is that 17 years previously, an alien race called the Hassan Natal arrived on Earth, kidnapped 9 women, impregnated them with genetically enhanced humans, and wiped their memories of what happened. They were meant to be sleeper agents, programmed when they reached a certain age to fight and kill Earth's heroes before they invaded. Thanks to the intervention of Ray Palmer, though, the 4 were able to repel the aliens and got back to Earth. From there, they were rescued by our old creepy pal Mr. Jupiter, who was aided by a mysterious cloaked figure named Omen. Jupiter sees the potential in the kids and invites them to train as a new team. A tabloid reporter, seeing some of the kids, declares them to be the new Teen Titans. So, who are these kids? Well, first is Risk. He's a hothead with enhanced agility and strength. Later in life, Superboy Prime would rip his arms off. Because Superboy Prime. Then there's Jodo, who had the ability to create intense heat from his hands, albeit his very original name was Slagger, and thank God they changed that because, well, that name is stupid. However, Jodo apparently didn't really work either. On the animated series, you might know him as Hotspot, changed because while in the comics they called him Jodo as it was Swahili for heat. Apparently, Jodo is a Mexican slang term for a homosexual. Yeah. The poor kid really can't catch a break with his name. How much you want to bet that in a few years we're going to learn that hotspot is some alien word for douchebag or something? Prism is a girl who was raised by the Hassan Natal in a virtual reality world. She's able to absorb and reflect light, usually in the form of energy bursts. Her deal is mostly how she feels like an outsider because of her appearance. In virtual reality, she looks completely human, but here she always appears like that. Not sure why her hair is like that too, though. On top of that, since she was basically raised in a fantasy world, the real world is a bit overwhelming for her. And finally, there was Argent, a spoiled rich girl who could create energy shields and energy daggers out of thin air. Unfortunately, she also got this costume to start with. Well, hooray for unnecessary tassel things on her wrists and the ever-plunging neckline. Speaking of, I will give credit to the costumes for looking unique and colorful, if a bit gaudy, and in Argent's case, yeah. But that brings us to something else. Who designed these outfits? Why, none other than the Mad Mod, the aforementioned villain from the 60s. He apparently reformed after his stint in prison and started his own fashion line, in turn working with Jupiter as a business partner. The comic is actually really damn good. There's good character drama, and the supervillain fights aren't just out-and-out slugfests. They actually have to use their powers intelligently and work as a team. Their personalities show multiple levels to who they are, and they actually do feel like very different people. In the first 12 issues, there isn't a bad issue in the bunch, albeit the beginning is rushed a bit to get the characters where they need to be. At the end of the first year of stories, Jupiter and Omen are kidnapped just as Jupiter sent out a distress call to the original Titans. Donna doesn't come because of the death of her son and husband, but the other 4 do, and it's really damn cool to see the group together in their adult personas. Speedy became Arsenal and Robin Nightwing, of course, but after Crisis on Infinite Earths, Wally West became the Flash, and Aqualad had his own miniseries where he got more mystical powers and took on a better costume and codename as Tempest. The group arrive at an island and discover that their memories have been erased of a mission they were on back in the days they were teamed up with Jupiter. They fight a villain called Hayes, who, despite a cool Skeletor look, speaks like a teenager. Mostly because he's a teenager. To be accurate, he's Jupiter's son from a failed marriage, jealous of the Titans for taking the attention of his estranged father. It looks like he's killed by accident, but he actually survived and has been planning his revenge this whole time. Jupiter, being the creepy asshole that he is, decided to spare the Titans the pain of what happened, since it was only a short time after the incident with the Peace Advocate's death, and had Lilith hypnotize them into forgetting the incident. Because as Identity Crisis taught us, mind wipes make everything better! Hayes had the power to create illusions and then give them life, like making the old and new Titans fight each other. He also gets some spiffy new threads, but unfortunately the cool look is ruined by the fact that he doesn't shut up and is snarky as all hell. Dude, you don't wear all black except for a scary mask and then talk like an internet reviewer. With that kind of look, you go for the overdramatic crap. During all of this, Omen is unmasked and we learn that she's actually Lilith. On top of that, it turns out she was actually Jupiter's daughter from a different marriage. In the ensuing battle, though, Jodo is seemingly killed while saving Jupiter's life. In the wake of Jodo's death, the other Titans start changing their outlooks a bit and want to carry on in his memory. But unfortunately, Jupiter decides to disband them, thinking it was all a mistake. The others are not so willing to give up, though, and Arsenal volunteers to train them. Argent is also especially on board with this, as she gets a new and much better look. Apparently there was a contest held for fans to vote on who would join the team, and Robin won out. Except the Batman editors banned him from being on the team. I'll get into that a bit more next time, but suffice to say with him out, they went with Captain Marvel Jr. instead. They're also joined by another of the impregnated teens, although this one is more alien than human, possessing a bestial personality and enhanced strength as well as a psychic beast it can project. He's called Fringe. I'd make a joke relating to the TV show Fringe, but I haven't watched it, and in fact haven't watched very much TV in the last few years. No, I just spent all my time reading superhero comics. And given what I've read about Fringe, it's really not all that different. The latter half of the series is sadly not as good as its first half, but was still pretty enjoyable in its own way as it continued the characters. Its biggest problem, I think, was that it tried to add too much humor into situations that didn't really necessitate them, and the drama they injected just wasn't that good until it comes to its ending storyline. Speaking of, its ending story is called Titan's Hunt. A bad sign, but still better than the original. A villain who has been plaguing the group since its inception, called Pylon, hires Deathstroke and a few other mercenaries to deal with the Titans. Pylon leads a coalition of anti-alien fanatics and dresses like Strife from Cable. And yet is still more dignified than Strife. Oh, and this was also the period when Deathstroke changed his costume into this ugly dark blue thing with armored padding everywhere. It's like he was getting fashion tips from Daredevil during the 90s. After Deathstroke leaves, we learn the truth behind Pylon. He is, in fact, a member of the Hassan Natal, returning to reclaim the Titans. However, he also reveals that Jodo is alive, restored to life using their alien science. What is worse, though, is that Prism's mother, it turns out, is in league with the Hassan Natal, and Ray Palmer's regressed age is causing him to rapidly age and de-age. Fortunately, Superman, Captain Marvel Jr., Lilith, and a return-to-Earth Beast Boy are hot on the trail of the Titans, helping get to them while Prism meets up with her parents. After a brief battle, it's agreed to let everyone go back to Earth save for Prism and Fringe. Ray Palmer is restored to his rightful age, and the team decides to disband, with Argent going off with Changeling to learn more about Titan's history, Risk going to take care of his mom, and Jodo wanting to spend time with his parents after being dead for a while. And thus ended the short-lived but rather enjoyable Teen Titans book. From what I've heard, the book was cancelled due to low sales, which is definitely a disappointment since it wasn't a bad book at all. I'd guess that despite frequent guest stars of past Titans members, the readership just wasn't on board with a team of completely new characters having the Teen Titans name. And while the book maintained its core 5 members for the first year or so of stories, it still suffered the Titans curse of having a fluctuating membership in its last year. It was stabilizing by that point, but too little too late. It is a real pity that this book ended so soon, but then again, I've seen books that don't get to survive even 1 year, so I'm still happy for the 2 it got. However, the Titans story does not end here, my friends. Next week, March of the Titans continues with the story that got me to start regularly reading comic books, and the next step of development for the Titans. In the late 90s, probably 1999 or so, my 5th grade class was taking a field trip for the weekend to a camp. We would ride on Greyhound buses for the multi-hour drive in relative comfort, but obviously I needed stuff to keep myself occupied on the trip. I didn't own a Game Boy Pocket yet, but my mom very nicely brought my brother and I to the local comic book store to pick out something to read on the trip. With my passing familiarity with the Titans in the Nightwing Secret Files and Origins comic I mentioned last week, I instantly noticed a trade paperback on the shelf, JLA/Titans, the Technis Imperative. The book promised a fight between the teams, and the idea of Nightwing fighting Batman was too tempting to resist, and so my mom bought it for me. And this is that same trade paperback, only obviously a little worse for wear over the years, with dog-eared pages and a part of the cover starting to rip a bit. Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Today, however, we're not talking about bad comics. We're talking about my favorite comic of all time, JLA/Titans, the Technis Imperative.
Where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. Brodsky, you're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he's a man punch, wears a birdie hat. Linkara, he has a magic gun. Where'd he purchase that? Linkara. Robots, Amazons, and trucks. Linkara. This comic sucks. Linkara.
So unfortunately, the mid-90s Teen Titans hadn't really caught on with readers, but there was still a demand for new material for the team. While of course DC had suffered in the early 90s along with the rest of the industry with the speculator boom and overuse of crossover comics and gimmicky covers and events and other staples of the time, the mid to late 90s were actually when the company really started to make headway again with some of the best stories of the last 20 years. Sure, there were still silly, gimmicky things happening, for example, Electric Blue Superman, but the stories themselves were pretty damn good. Grant Morrison was routinely breaking 100,000 sales on JLA, James Robinson's Starman series was a major hit, and while Neil Gaiman's Sandman book was coming to a close, it was still a solid series that lasted longer and with more awesome stories than I think anyone would have predicted. The reintroduction of the Justice Society of America characters in Starman and Sandman, coupled with a test run during one of Morrison's JLA arcs, most likely inspired DC to bring back the first superhero team in 1999. And alongside all of those great books came JLA/Titans, the Technis Imperative. It's interesting going back and reading interviews at the time in preparation for the mini and all the things that ended up changing for it or what motivated costumes and name changes. For example, at the end of this miniseries, Cyborg gets a new look motivated by, of all things, an Elseworld story that I've brought up before, Kingdom Come. And unlike books about Catwoman's boob socks or superheroes losing their powers and becoming neurotic idiots as a result, Kingdom Come was a good Elseworld story. We'll talk some more about Kingdom Come and its sequel, The Kingdom, next time, because of the effects it ended up having on the book and the DC Universe. So what's the story behind the Technis Imperative? Well, I've been reading up and getting a few conflicting accounts there. From Devin Grayson, the writer, she said the book was just something that always had been floating around the offices, and they finally decided to do it, and halfway in they decided to launch the new Titan series. Phil Jimenez, the co-writer and artist, said that the Titan series was already going to happen due to popular demand, and the miniseries was just seen as a bridge to creating the new book. Whichever is the case, the Technis Imperative is probably the best example out there of the problem with a shared superhero universe. You see, DC and Marvel tend to be structured into little fiefdoms. Fiefdoms? So, like a group of writers and editors for the Batman books, a group of writers and editors for the Superman books, etc., etc. So, situations like this are pretty common. Yay! I have written a story where Batman and Wonder Woman team up to fight Lex Luthor. Nay! I am the editor of the Superman books, and ye shall not use Lex Luthor in your story. I doth protest! I am the editor of Wonder Woman, and ye shall not use Wonder Woman unless you mention this event occurring in the book. This might seem like a chaotic way of operating, and it is, but it's actually been done by the industry ever since the 30s and 40s. Superman and Batman were both members of the Justice Society back then, but the respective editors refused to let the characters be seen on the covers of Justice Society books, worried about reader confusion and brand dilution. It took the higher-ups of the company to say, those people don't own these characters, we do, so put them on the cover. And that's essentially what's happening in the Technis Imperative. It basically features the entire DC universe, almost every living Justice League member, every member of the Titans, and remember, there's a lot of those, and in turn, the big three of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. So everybody had a say in how those characters are written and portrayed. Issue 2 actually got a lot of rewrites because the JLA editor didn't like how they were coming off in the story. Devin Grayson said in an interview that we're basically reading the 39th version of the story after all the rewrites and restructures. And if you're wondering why I spent an hour telling you guys about the history of the Teen Titans, this story is the reason why. While in my opinion, the Technis Imperative is a story that you don't need to know the history of the Titans to enjoy, it really does make a much better experience if you do. Anyway, let's get this thing started. Sometimes you do get everything you want. Well, that kind of invalidates the whole you can't always get what you want song. Stop being so optimistic. Starfire, in perhaps the most modest outfit she's ever worn, is being chased through space by some kind of weird goopy ball thing that's changing shape. Of course, she'd have an easier time evading this thing if there weren't all these damn flashback panels in her way. I mean, yeah, there was danger. We never knew what was gonna hit us next. One day it would be murderous fashion designers, other days our own teammates inexplicably turning evil. And as scared as I sometimes was, I always knew I would never have to face a threat alone. Not when I had my friend Billy the Handgun. We weren't just a team, we weren't just friends, we were the Super Friends. Me and Cyborg, Raven, Starfire, Wonder Girl, Nightwing. True story, when I first read this, I basically knew nothing about the team and I completely missed that first comma, so I assumed there was a character named Cyborg Raven. We were a family, which made it kind of uncomfortable for us when Starfire kept walking around in a bikini. Oh, and speaking of Starfire, there's this comic book legend that artist Wally Wood tried to draw Power Girl's breasts larger and larger until they asked him to stop. I wonder if there was a similar thing going on with Starfire's hair. Because really, you can get away with the stylized flying with the hair streak behind her, but that doesn't really excuse the size of her hair actually being larger than her own torso. Anyway, when we last left off in the Titans history, Argent and Beast Boy had gone off together, and that's where we are now, the two talking about their time together and lamenting that there aren't any Titans. But you said you were traveling with Cyborg? Why'd you leave him? Vic, you mean? He calls himself Siberian now. I don't know, he just got really weird. He tried to install Windows 8 on himself and just started going nuts. There's an alarm in the wherever the hell they are, and it turns out it's Prism and Fringe. What are you doing here?
What are you doing here?
Prism warns them that something has shut down half of the Hassan Natal Empire, and it's headed for Earth. Just as we see Starfire getting captured and Omen teleporting away, sensing an impending disaster. Wait, some great disaster? Countdown! Ah! We cut to the JLA watchtower on the moon, where they're installing some new technology. Among their members are the Flash and the Kyle Rayner Green Lantern, who's feeling down at the moment because of what happened in a then-recent event called DC 1 Million. However, the technology starts going nuts as they spot a large sphere, similar to the one that had been chasing Starfire, approaching the moon. Green Lantern and Orion head out to engage it, and the Martian Manhunter senses no biological life. This is important to note since it explains the attitude of the JLA in this book. We cut to Starfire, who awakens on what looks like Tamaran, but everything aside from her looks very washed out. Her parents arrive and wonder about where Dick Grayson is, and inquires about her children. Dick isn't with me, and we are not married. I mean, we tried, but then the priest got vaporized, and my friend turned evil, and she made out with me, only I then carried her soul. It was a whole thing. It was probably best that you didn't attend. The reception afterwards was just awkward. You both died when Tamaran was destroyed, and I have no children. Ha! You know why that's so damn amusing to me? There was actually a lot in the team history of the New Teen Titans book that I didn't talk about because it wasn't relevant to the proceedings here. One of those is that Starfire actually got married to some no-name guy off-panel at the end of the New Titans, and it was heavily implied that she was pregnant with his kid. Retcons! For when you need to remove completely stupid and pointless plots. Back on Earth, chaos quickly begins erupting across the globe. Electronic devices are going haywire, while all computer databases throughout the world are being hacked and downloaded. Oracle consults with Batman on it, saying he should shut down the Batcomputer, and what the hell is Batman wearing? With the shoulder spikes? I don't even remember that being a thing in the 90s with Batman.
Now that I look like Strife, everyone will know that I'm cool. I'm Batman.
Up in space, the JLA observe dozens of objects splitting off from the sphere thing and heading out to various parts of the world. Except for 3 that head towards the JLA watchtower. Green Lantern, the Flash, and the Atom are all taken by the alien probes. One heads to Gotham and scans Robin, Tim Drake, but it doesn't match and it heads off instead for Bloodhaven, taking Nightwing. One of the probes even arrives at Cyborg's grandparents' house, but leaves when it doesn't find him. And naturally, the same thing just keeps happening. Reports come across from all over the place. Troya, Terra 2, and etc. All the former members of the Titans throughout their various incarnations get taken by the probes. The Flash, thinking that he's destroyed the probe that was sent for him, suddenly sees an image of his uncle, the former Flash, Barry Allen. Barry? My God, Barry, you've come back! I hope this doesn't result in a really pointless miniseries that ends up rebooting the entirety of the DC Universe in 2011 and gets me completely erased from history. Because that would be stupid. By the way, I should note that something really damn awesome about this book that made it so accessible to me, despite not really knowing that much about the DC Universe at the time, are these little profile boxes that show up anytime another member of the Titans shows up. Sure, it doesn't give their complete biography, but it gives you a name and description of their powers, and that's incredibly helpful for new readers. Anyway, one of the people the probes doesn't manage to catch is Raven, and we spot her in golden form chasing after them. So the probes don't really seem powerful enough to be wreaking all the havoc on Earth that's occurring. So what could actually be responsible for sweet merciful crap and swallowing the moon? I would say pants to be darkened, but I can assure you that it's already done. With the moon being overtaken by, well, that, we see Batman arriving at a familiar island off the New York coastline. He sends out a distress call to the JLA to meet him at his coordinates, since he's followed the probes to their destination. Up on the moon, Orion sees that the object swallowing the moon is basically an alien junkyard, composed of various ships and pieces of technology all crammed together. He opens fire on it, and suddenly the Earth starts tearing itself apart. Earthquakes, typhoons, tidal waves, all the fun stuff that happens when you screw with the moon. Orion's attacks are agitating whatever the thing is, and it's pulling on the moon in response. The alien force teleports the remaining JLA off the moon and sends them to Earth, where everyone reconvenes at Batman's location. He says they're dealing with a hostage situation now, and they can't risk a direct assault. You know, for that reason, and certainly not the whole attacking it caused the entire world to risk exploding like a shaken up soda can thing. Back in Flashland, Wally naturally doesn't buy any of this and starts vibrating rapidly, which causes him to break free of some kind of storage tank where he had been held. Raven greets him and they get to work on freeing the others. Speaking of, Nightwing finds himself in a similar setting as he sees Batman. Who does this? And then he smiles. Whenever Batman smiles like this, thousands of people start crying and they don't know why. And Nightwing's reaction to this is best. He just kinda gawks at him and says he isn't Batman, walking off and coming across Beast Boy. Using a Tibetan meditation technique, he breaks the two of them free and they join up with Flash and Raven. And of course, they realize that they're surrounded by capsules containing captured Titans. Wait a second. Red capsules containing people. Virtual reality constructs. How dare they rip off the Matrix a whole year before the Matrix came out! After Batman gets some more reports about Titans who have been taken, he identifies that they're of course on Titan's Island, and their first priority is to get the hostages safe. Also, Catwoman is stalking nearby. Yeah, I have no idea why Catwoman is here. Editorial mandate, if I had to guess. She's in the purple Jim Balance costume, but at least it isn't some stupid corset thing. By the way, this book has some neat parallel transitions, with characters speaking a line of dialogue and then it's finished by another character in a different scene. And part 1 ends with another example of that, as Batman asks for thoughts from the JLA members before it transitions to the 4 Titans discussing said thoughts. Who could be responsible for all of this? Beast Boy says it isn't any of their villains. The one responsible is none other than Victor Stone, Cyborg. In part 2, the alien force, detecting the JLA's presence on the island, dispatches more probes to gather potential allies for the Titans in their fight, while Beast Boy and Raven explain what the hell is going on. It's a big exposition dump, but a good one. It feels completely natural and comes directly from the voices of the characters. Beast Boy explains about how Cyborg's life was kinda sucky. All he ever wanted was to be more human, but as time went on, he just became less, not helped during that whole being completely robotic phase. He explains the Technis stuff a lot better than I could, and how they needed his humanity and soul to give it purpose. But then, during the end of the New Titan series, the Technis got destroyed. Cyborg, now Siberian, wanted to honor the Technis Imperative, and there's your title, by exploring the universe. He asked Beast Boy to keep him company, but the farther into deep space they got, the more his mind retreated into the machine. Raven takes over from here. You remember that Jarrus minion kid from last time? Well, it seems he gave a gift to Siberian. His Omegadrome warsuit. The Omegadrome was an advanced techno-organic material, think the T-1000.
A mimetic polyalloy.
What the hell does that mean?
Liquid metal.
It enabled Siberian to assimilate various pieces of technology throughout the universe and try to recreate the Technis. Except he's gotten a bit confused. His desire to recreate the Technis got cross-wired with his humanity and memories. Thus, instead of recreating the beings of light on Technis, he wanted to recreate his family, which was defined as the Titans. Sure, he wants to actually bring all his friends together again, but there is this little problem.
He's more machine now than man.
And that's basically it. His programming tells him to bring together all the Titans, but it has no way of distinguishing them, hence why he collected members of the 1996 Teen Titans even though he had never met them. Yeah, what these guys don't realize is that in the next room, the cast of Remember the Titans are right alongside several voice actors from Zeta Gundam. Siberian took the moon because he's still trying to recreate the giant Technis planet that we saw in the New Titans, not realizing that he's, well, kind of dooming mankind. Although, losing the moon in Space 1999 didn't seem to hurt the Earth. Maybe we could let him borrow it. They discover a central processing unit that they suspect houses Cyborg's consciousness or humanity and get to work freeing all the other Titans from the virtual reality programs. The Flash is able to make contact with the JLA and the group unites, although the JLA seem to mostly ignore the Titans or their attempts to explain what's going on. Oh hey, my fans? You like having your hearts broken? Yeah. Donna Troy's virtual reality fantasy? She's in a white void playing with a virtual reality construct of her dead son. Nightwing finds her, says he's sorry, but it isn't real, and she just tearfully replies that she knows. You may begin crying your eyes out. Sometimes I am evil. With the remaining Titans free, Orion, brain trust that he is, opens fire on the CPU housing Cyborg's consciousness. The empaths and psychics in the group immediately feel the sensation of pain from it, and Beast Boy yells at them to knock it the hell off since their friend is in there. However, Superman states that everything they've seen seems to indicate that Cyborg's not really alive anymore, that at best he's a computer program. The world is in danger and they need to stop this thing. Kyle Rayner backs up Superman and asks Flash if he's coming. His response? Vic isn't our enemy. He's a friend in trouble. He's practically family and he needs our help. He needs the Titans. Ooh, this is gonna get good. The Atom goes all Spock on us and says they need to think of the needs of the many before the needs of the few. Flash is all, screw that, I liked Star Trek 3 better than Star Trek 2, and I'm helping my family. Beast Boy argues that if he was just a program, he couldn't react to them the way he is. He also says, under no uncertain terms, that if they try to hurt him again, he'll stop them. I believe the Earth saying goes, you and what army? This one! I cannot express enough how much I fricking love this comic and this page in particular. As a critic, all I can think of is, why are they this close to each other? But that part is being buried under all the awesome personified in this. Phil Jimenez, like George Perez, is an artist who is most comfortable and most talented when they're drawing hundreds of characters on a page. The characters all have distinct personalities and looks. The attention to detail is excellent, and this is also the first time all of the Titans, the living ones at least, are all on one page together. If I had the power, I would take this image and blow it up so it was big enough to put on a wall in my apartment. I love it that much! What follows are 17 pages of fight scene with several Titans facing one or two JLA members at a time. Siberian uses holographic technology to create a battle environment for the groups, of course favoring the Titans over the JLA. I won't cover it in detail because honestly, it's so good you need to read it for yourselves. It's another example of Phil Jimenez's talents as an artist, as he manages to cram a lot into these pages, and it all feels perfectly natural. Hell, on the bottom of the pages, we see the probes recruiting various individuals to assist the Titans from their history to come to their aid. There isn't actually a battle between Nightwing and Batman, just the two of them debating each other, which is probably for the best. I can't actually think of a time when the two have really ever had an all-out fight with one another. Occasionally one has hit the other in a moment of passion, but never a full fight. However, it turns out this whole thing has been, in fact, a diversion by the JLA against Cyborg. He's so preoccupied with helping the Titans in the fight that his defenses have been lowered both on the ground and on the moon. As such, Nightwing gathers together a group of Titans, the originals of himself, Troya, Arsenal, Tempest, and Flash, to go up to the moon and see if they can get his attention while they deconstruct the Earth-based CPU safely. Beast Boy, spotting what's happening, stows away to help. Although, when you stop and think about it, that doesn't really make any sense. They've admitted that Cyborg's consciousness, or rather his soul, is inside of that collection of orange egg things, so why are they going to the moon to make contact with him? Batman stops the fight just as both the Titans reinforcements and the JSA arrive. Since all the heroes are now gathered in one place, they can be dispatched throughout the globe to deal with all the disasters that are still happening. Issue 3 begins with another task force going to the moon to keep it from, being pulled away from the planet, while yet another team heads back into the JLA watchtower to try to deconstruct the object itself. The Titans arrive within the construct and wonder how to get Cyborg's attention. Arsenal has the brilliant idea of firing an explosive arrow at a wall. It's Roy Harper's great decision-making ability that we see demonstrated here that would eventually lead to him listening to a zombie ghost of his daughter that tells him to do drugs, kill people, and burn things. Naturally, this does get Cyborg's attention and he separates the group. Back on Titan's Island, we get some exposition about why the hell the Titans are up on the moon and not trying to talk to the orange egg things. Raven says that Victor's soul retreated after Orion's barrage. What? Don't your computers have a backup system that has all the data immediately transferred to another location if you smash it with an axe? They need to try to repair the egg things because if they can reach Cyborg, they need to put him somewhere that's not, all around the moon, and hey, if this thing was working on it before, it should work again, right? Unfortunately, it's severely damaged, and they're not sure if they're going to be able to do it in the short time they have. Hey, need another reminder why I love superhero comics more than TV shows and movies? Okay, get this. During this era, Wonder Woman's invisible plane is actually a kind of magic, malleable goop that she could form into shapes. As such, she and Kyle Rayner use it and the Green Lantern ring to construct a net around the moon to grab hold of it, and with the help of every superpowered hero of the DCU, push the moon back into its proper orbit. You just can't top that! Maybe in like Gurren Lagann or something, but my friends, pushing the moon back into its orbit while it's netted up with willpower and invisible plane goop. This is what superhero comics should be all about! The Titans each have an encounter with Cyborg in various forms and all try to reach him, but none of them seem successful. Except for Beast Boy, who has his own unique way of getting his attention. Hey, Rust Bucket! Let go of the frickin' moon already, will ya? I want that on a bumper sticker or a t-shirt or something. Hey, Rust Bucket, let go of the frickin' moon already, will ya? Beast Boy makes his speech to Cyborg, which I will spare you, the gist of which being, come back, old buddy. When it's clear he's not going to get him back, he asks who can convince him to come back, and an image of Cyborg's father appears. This is enough to wake the guy up, and Raven directs his soul towards the Titan's Island CPU. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a problem. See, without Cyborg to keep everything under control, the entire structure around the moon completely destabilizes, including the atmosphere for the Titans. Whoops. The space debris starts floating away, and while the Titans join hands to keep together, the JLA gets to work on dealing with all the giant pieces of flotsam. To make matters worse, the island CPU is too badly damaged to hold his soul in its entirety. Raven temporarily houses it with her powers, though it won't last long. The Titans spot the Omegadrome and try to get control of it to make something to survive in. Unfortunately, Cyborg is still psychically connected to it, so they can't gain control of it. Omen teleports in, where the hell have you been, Lilith? And informs the group of the situation with Cyborg's soul. Beast Boy suggests taking the Omegadrome back to Earth since he's still connected to it, but because of its size, she can't teleport it and all of the others back to Earth. Nightwing orders Beast Boy to go with and they succeed, funneling Cyborg into the Omegadrome, which forms into a new golden body for him. First Raven and now Cyborg. What is it with people on this team getting reborn in shiny new gold forms? Hell, this kind of happened to Donna Troy one time too! With the likelihood that they're going to die, the five Titans say their farewells to each other, and it's all very touching. Good thing we've got Kyle Rayner to help with that, who shows up and saves them. To be fair, though, he was the only one in the JLA who remembered, oh crap, the Titans are still in there! And so our comic ends with an epilogue featuring the Titans and JLA having a party at Guy Gardner's bar. We even see all of Dick Grayson's love interests or admirers talking it up. I really hope Mirage doesn't bring up that she's actually slept with him. We even get to see a hinting at the next generation of teen heroes and how they'll become Young Justice. And so, aside from me having to summarize and condense a whole bunch, that's the Technis Imperative, my absolute favorite comic book of all time. Despite the fact that this is not an event comic, it is the book that I hold as the standard which I compare all event comics to. Think about it. Like an event comic, it has a cast of hundreds, the stakes and effects are global, and it does have lasting consequences after it finishes. But what makes it better than every other event comic ever published? Nobody dies! No heroes pointlessly killed off, no grand epic last stands that get reversed a year later, and no gruesome, gory demises.
Just this once. Everybody lives.
Hell, we actually have -1 deaths. Cyborg as a character was pretty much dead until this, so he's brought back from the brink. The moral dilemma is a good one, and the ones who have split loyalties go their natural ways for their characters. We see superheroes fighting, but for completely logical reasons. We see superheroes fighting off natural disasters and using their powers for good. There's great dialogue, great action, and despite having like 40 or 50 people all competing for attention, no one feels wasted. This book is why I scoff at the idea that decades of continuity can be a problem for incoming readers. I didn't know who 99% of these people were when I first read it, and yet it fits in all that continuity briefly enough so you know what's going on without feeling overwhelmed by it. When I finished this book, I wanted to know more about the team. I wanted to find these past stories and read them because they sounded so damn awesome. You could say this book is continuity porn, but it does it in the best way. It makes you want to read what came before, and that is how you get new comic book readers, by making them want to read more. With the success of the Technis Imperative would come the book that I've been leading up to this entire time. Come back next week as we discuss the first 25 issues of my favorite comic series, The Titans. Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. But if you've been following March of the Titans so far, you would know that we're not looking at bad comics this month, but a series featuring my favorite superhero team, the Teen Titans. However, for the next 2 weeks, forget the teen part of that title. This was the first Titans book that was mostly about the adult heroes, though there were still some younger heroes, as I'll get into. Before we do, though, there are a few bits of backstory we need to talk about. First up is the issue of Donna Troy. As I've brought up before, her backstory kept getting rewritten, or she kept losing her powers on whatever whim the writers brought up, and we've got another one of those. Okay, get this. Remember Wonder Woman's mother, Queen Hippolyta? Well, she's got her own fair share of people who want to screw with her. In yet another unnecessary revised origin for Donna, she was actually a mirror duplicate of Wonder Woman as a little girl, meant to be a playmate since there were no other kids on Paradise Island. One of Hippolyta's enemies, named Dark Angel... Oh, and by the way, Dark Angel? Really? 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 Dark Angel kidnapped Donna, thinking she was Wonder Woman, and decided the best revenge was to make her live lifetime after lifetime that always ended in tragedy. Each time she died, everything would reset and the world would forget her. However, then the whole being rescued by the Titans of Myth thing happened, so her having a life that ended in tragedy got the kibosh put on it. However, Dark Angel is a pissy sort and went and erased the world's memory of her and, well, erased her from existence. With the assistance of Wonder Woman, Queen Hippolyta, and the Flash, however, they managed to restore her to life. The one caveat, though, was that they restored her using the Flash's memories of her. And it's certainly a good thing that Wally was present at every single moment of her life, isn't it? Yeah, as you might imagine, this is something that plays into this book. The next thing we need to discuss is an Elseworld story called Kingdom Come and its sequel, The Kingdom. Why? Well, because they have an impact later in the series as well. DC has this weird relationship with its dark future stories, like they always want to see things head towards them even if the entire idea behind them was that they were a possible future. They did this with The Dark Knight Returns when that was extremely popular. Suddenly, elements from that book needed to play a part, like hinting that Green Arrow would lose his arm because of Superman. Kingdom Come was the same way. It told a story where Superman had retired after it became clear that the public accepted and exonerated murderous anti-heroes, openly approving of their methods over his. However, when those same anti-heroes then screw up big time and end up accidentally nuking Kansas, Superman comes out of retirement and, unfortunately, overreacts. He and his group end up going too far the other way, to the point where they start becoming more oppressive, and thanks to the machinations of Luthor, things come to a head with a lot of people dying. Superman resolves to change his ways and be better. The sequel, The Kingdom, is not as good, but it had different goals in mind. It's a very complicated story, so I'm only going to talk to you guys about one thing that was introduced in that story. Hypertime. Yes, you've all heard me reference Hypertime before, especially in regards to certain wrestlers and comics they've made.
Load the spaceship with the rocket fuel. Load it with the worst.
But what the hell is Hypertime anyway? Well, in a nutshell, Hypertime was DC's way of reintroducing the multiverse without really reintroducing the multiverse. You'll recall that the 1985 story Crisis on Infinite Earths was supposed to shut the door on parallel universes altogether. The Kingdom introduced a new concept behind the multiverse to make it work while still keeping to that. Hypertime is the vast interconnected web of parallel universes and timelines. It flows like a river with a central line, that being the main DC universe, while branching off into tributaries like alternate timelines and Elseworld stories. And on top of that, those tributaries can come back again and flow into the main universe and appear in different ways, like a new costume for a character, or perhaps someone just thinking of a loved one or friend that they hadn't thought about in years. It was a pretty clever way of handling it, I thought. Unfortunately, the majority of writers and fans just didn't really take to it, hence why in Infinite Crisis and 52, the more traditional multiverse was restored, with parallel universes just vibrating at different frequencies or whatever, and a space caterpillar eating parts of their history. Because that's much more sane and logical. And with all that out of the way, let's dig into the Titans number 1 through 25.
Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. Brodsky, you're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he's a man punch, wears a party hat. Linkara, he has a magic gun. Where'd he purchase that? Robots, Amazon and trucks, Linkara. This comic sucks, Linkara.
At the same time as issue 1 launched, there was also a Secret Files and Origins comic published for the Titans that was full of dossiers on team members, villains, and a few short stories. One of them actually gave an explanation for what happened with Arsenal's group of government-funded Titans. It's not really all that important, but essentially, Arsenal deliberately sabotaged the group's public image so they'd all be fired by the government. Nothing overly malicious that would screw them all over, but he could see the team wasn't gelling as a family, and all of its members were going to be going their separate ways anyway. It's something to remember about the guy, and why Rise of Arsenal is even more frustrating. He's honestly not that stupid. People underestimate him and don't realize he has a good head on his shoulders. Sure, he's never going to be Nightwing level smart, but that's the difference between being raised by Batman versus being raised by Green Arrow, whose reaction upon finding out that teenager Roy Harper was doing heroin was to throw him out on his ass. Anyway, like with the Countdown review or the team history segment, this is going to be a lot of summarizing. Sorry, but that's what happens when I stupidly decide to take a look at 25 comics at a time. The series itself begins with our heroes under attack by the Hive. You remember them, right? Of course you don't, because I barely mentioned them in the team history segment. See, the problem with the Hive as villains is that they're not very interesting bad guys. It's basically just a big, well-organized terrorist group in the Cobra tradition where they can afford to equip everybody with armor and have logos painted on everything and stuff. The Hive themselves are not that great. It's everything else that they set in motion that's interesting, like the original contract with Deathstroke. Subsequently, issue 1 is focused not on them battling the Hive, but rather seeing the original 5 Titans deciding to get the band back together while at a Red Lobster. The Titans! Action! Intrigue! Drama! Fish sticks! Flash is the first one who suggests it, but Nightwing is adamantly against the idea. Don't you remember why we broke up in the first place? Everything gets so personal. Not really. All the previous times we saw you guys break up, you either had already left the team, or it was because you wanted to go back to school. Or were you guys sharing a dorm room together, too? Flash convinces Nightwing it's for the best for him because, well, he's starting to become more and more like Batman. Batman during this phase was very much the dark loner despite his huge network of former sidekicks, to the point where it was policy that Batman was an urban legend in Gotham, with only so many people believing he actually existed. I'm Batman, and no one knows that I'm real. But the police still turn on the bat signal. I am of the shadows. No one can see me. Robin still wears bright colors, and there are police records and hospital records for the people you beat up. Da 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 da. Meanwhile, we see the Hive reforming under a mysterious new Hive mistress, but assisted by a man named Damien Dark. Silly name, yes, but he was actually conceived to be a break away from traditional villainy. Anyone out there familiar with the Evil Overlord list? Basically, it's kind of a gag list of stuff like, my evil minions will wear clear transparent helmets so heroes can't disguise themselves as a minion. Or, among my advisors will be a 5-year-old child. If they can spot a problem with my plan, I will not go with that plan. And thus Damien Dark is a late 90s business type, constantly on a cell phone.
I'm a businessman on my cell phone!
Negotiating his evil plans. Hell, check it out. He even has a utility belt of gadgets. That's awesome. Back with the Titans, Nightwing and Flash make a $10 bet that Flash will stick around longer than Nightwing will. It's a losing bet to be sure, considering Flash is on 2 teams. Anyway, Nightwing agrees to form the team with the goal of training the future generation of heroes. After all, the 5 of them had the advantage of working alongside the greatest heroes ever, but sidekicks are a dying art, thus younger heroes need better training. Albeit, that just makes the next bit kind of confusing, since all 5 volunteer a hero to be recruited, and among them are Starfire and Cyborg, who are both veterans. Well, okay, they say it's because they need people to supplement the team since some of them are really damn busy. Troya nominates Argent from the 1996 team, who does fit the bill for a young hero needing direction, especially since we saw in the team history that she is serious about heroing. Flash nominates Jesse Quick, who at the time was both kind of new but also a veteran. Jesse Quick is the daughter of 2 Golden Age heroes, Johnny Quick and Liberty Bell. She's able to access super speed through the use of a mathematical formula that taps into an other-dimensional realm called the Speed Force, where the modern-day Flashes tend to get their powers from. And by the way, I love Jessie's costume. I can't exactly pin down why, since it's not like the outfit reflects her speed or anything. It just looks good on her, probably thanks to the artist of the Titans, Mark Buckingham. Buckingham was the penciler on the Titans for the first 16 issues, and he has a style that's hard to describe, a bit cartoony, but he's excellent at expressive faces. And sometimes you don't realize just how important it is to have expressive faces until you've read 36 comics where all the characters are going like this, regardless of their mood. Next up is Damage. I only briefly mentioned Damage from his tenure in the New Titans under Arsenal's command, mostly because he's probably the team member I have the least amount of feelings about. He's young and emotional, but has a lot of potential for greatness, helped by his power to expel incredible bursts of concussive energy, sometimes outside of his control. He's the son of the Golden Age Atom, and we later learn in the series that his childhood was not a happy one. We'll get to that. So, yeah, 10 team members. Admittedly, a bit large for a team book, but I think they managed to make it work, with some members off doing their own thing sometimes, and big dangerous missions could have everybody on board. The unofficial 11th member, in my mind, was Arsenal's daughter Leanne Harper, the most adorable ball of adorable ever. Yeah, I know real little kids are terrors and annoying and screeching and not always cute, but up yours, Leanne rocked! And then the zombie ghost thing happened. Yeah. Anyway, they also get to work on building a new headquarters, only they decide that it'd be kind of stupid to have a giant T building, considering the last 2 times they did, it got blown up. As such, Titan's Tower in this case is actually a hologram, while the base itself is underground. All of this is financed by Tempest, who of course lives under the sea, and thus has access to tons of sunken treasure. The Secret Files and Origins comic showed the 5 recruiting the other members, but in the meantime, we see them working with the Buzz Construction Company. Arsenal points out how tiring it is to see all the busy bees working. Bees? Bees, my god. Dear lord, Nightwing is becoming like Batman! And yeah, turns out the new Hive is the actual construction company, leading to the beginning of the comic. The Hive foot soldiers in this case we saw being recruited before by Damien Dark, basically a group of college-age nihilist criminals who were trying to rob a bank. Issue 2 has Superman showing up as part of a storyline going on in the Superman books at the time. He was basically showing up in several other books as well, offering assistance while acting as Superman 24/7 without a break, trying to avert tragedy wherever possible. In this case, he offers assistance against the Hive, who have just been defeated by the team from the previous issue. Said Hive members also try to form a gigantic mech suit. A deadly bee weapon. Okay, I know I just did the Batman Amazon's attack thing, but give me a break here. When was the last time I got to reference that? After Superman easily dispatches it, they go with him to a base where they were operating out of, and we get character development, setting up character plots while also having Nightwing pointing out that Superman's presence makes it nigh impossible for them to work as a team, since anytime they start coming together to face a threat, Superman just, does it himself. Nightwing finally tells him that he appreciates the help, but to clear off so they can do their job. Jessie Quick's fast thinking makes her the second in command of the team, and she is a natural leader, helped by the fact that in her civilian life she's a CEO of a company. I have no idea what the hell her company did, but hey, rich people fighting crime, it's a thing. Issues 3 and 4 are a 2-parter detailing a new villain named Goth. He's a horror movie star who spends all of his time supposedly in makeup, but in reality is a demon. Continuing on with that nihilism thing, Goth actually does care about his teenage fans and thinks the best way to help them is to bring them all into a Hell City limbo state wherein they never have to worry about anything ever again. Goth basically became something of a non-villain, which is kind of disappointing since he does have an interesting thing going for him, but they set up a possible return for him and didn't really follow up on it, aside from a cameo in the lead-up to Infinite Crisis. However, the larger concern that arises from this is the matter of Donna's identity. Arsenal mentions to her offhandedly that Flash doesn't remember the good times, and that gets Donna questioning how much of herself is really there, since, again, she's been reconstructed from his memories. And it was kind of embarrassing when they had to reteach her how to use the bathroom. This leads to a bit of an incident when the 4 women on the team go to a nightclub and a guy tries to hit on Donna by saying he feels like he already knows her. And after a page cut, we see that she has clearly flung him into a wall and is yelling at him while also in tears. And all thanks to what Arsenal said to her. Roy Harper, making everybody else's life so much better. What's more, when Goth tries to touch Donna, he gets a big ol' shock of some kind. When Goth brings the kids to hell, using a book that he had all his fans sign, everyone is able to follow except for Donna. Oh, and speaking of their trip to hell, I don't care if the anatomy is off on Argent, this is an absolutely badass group shot. Issue 5 is a Tempest story where he takes Damage and Argent to a seaside town where people are deathly afraid of water thanks to a mermaid named, of course, Siren, who is using her song to hypnotize them. They defeat her, but at the end, she's rescued from police custody by longtime DC Universe villain Vandal Savage. Vandal Savage is immortal, having been struck by a strange meteor during caveman times that also endowed him with enhanced intelligence and strength. Issue 6 formally begins a relationship between Donna and Roy. Donna embraces him mostly, it seems, to help create an identity for herself. Now, it is a bit sexist that she needs a man to form her own identity, but for her it's about figuring out if she's really herself or if she's just Wally's pure, perfect version of her. The relationship with Roy makes a lot of sense from a continuity standpoint as well. The two were always flirting with each other during the 60s series, and Roy even admitted once during the New Teen Titans that he thought for a time that he was in love with her. The two fight a Nazi supervillain called the Red Panzer, because we always like to see Nazis beaten up, but then Red Panzer gets teleported away by Vandal Savage, who we see has also joined forces with Flash villain Gorilla Grodd. Nazis and gorillas. I freaking love superhero comics. However, a subplot in the story has to do with Ball of Adorable Leanne. Her babysitter, Chanda, is talking with her and brings up that her grandparents were from the fictional nation called Curak. Curak got nuked once by Cheshire, Leanne's mother. And in case you missed the Rise of Arsenal review, yes, I know it's technically pronounced Cheshire. I've always pronounced it as Cheshire. Moving on. After Leanne reveals who her mother is, the two disappear, leading into issues 7 and 8. Chanda didn't take her, but it actually was her roommate, who's a drug addict desperate for money for our new fictional drug of choice, Velocity 10. Velocity 10 grants the user super speed, but of course burns them out pretty quickly when they come down from it. The drug addiction part is pretty stock for them, just having to track down the dealer and put a stop to it, but the two issues actually are great for advancing a number of subplots. One of them is that Tempest, who's married to another Aquaman supporting character named, well, Dolphin, is going to be a father. In addition, we learn that the one who's financing the drug is Argent's father. It had been heavily hinted that her father was in the drug trade back in the 1996 team, but this is more resolution on it, since she has to admit that the Titans are her real family now. Vandal Savage recruits two more villains, a Nightwing recurring villain named Lady Vic, and of course Cheshire, who volunteers to join up. And what is Vandal Savage calling his team of villains? Tartarus! Subtlety, thy name is Titans. Although it makes even goofier sense later on, I can assure you. However, it's here where we start having that dreaded bug of being part of a shared superhero universe again. See, over in the Flash book, Wally West supposedly died in an alternate reality of Hypertime. That reality's Flash, a darker, older version of Wally who went by Wallace West, went back to the main DC universe to take Wally's place in honor of his sacrifice. For reasons that were hopefully explained in the Flash book, he didn't want people to know who he was, but did reveal his identity to a few people, Donna Troy included. And thus she vouched for him on the team, but it ended up working out for the book, as I'll get to. Issue 9 is a tie-in to the event going on at the time called Day of Judgment, which featured an invasion of Earth by Hell. Which makes the opening scene of this issue all the more hilarious. Roy and Donna are trying to have sex. It's not that they are having sex that's hilarious, but rather that in the actual Day of Judgment book, we actually do see at least Damage and Argent fighting off demons. So while the newer, younger heroes are fighting the good fight, these seasoned veterans are trying to bone each other. Also, the opening page featuring the two is, yeah, those faces. This is the face you make when you're having sex and an old friend stops by, right? However, being just a tie-in, it's not really all that important in the grand scheme of things, other than advancing subplots some more. In this case, when Donna tries to get into heaven, long story, has to do with Day of Judgment, she gets expelled, much like how she was unable to get into hell. The Hive Mistress finally comes back into things and demands action on her quest to eliminate the world of superheroes. But the good Mr. Dark, oh, and it's spelled dark with an H, because poor literacy is hip and modern, demands some payment before he continues, and the Hive Mistress holds out her arm. Deathstroke gets attacked by Tartarus, and he just barely manages to reach Titan's Island. Although, considering he stumbles over after arriving, that makes me wonder if he swam to the island after first being in a jungle, but whatever. This leads into the three-parter that concludes the first year of the team, The Immortal Coil. We get Deathstroke to narrate his life story for us and even give us some details that didn't happen in the Titans book. In this case, that he actually died once, but Cheshire brought him back to life by mutating his blood and making him effectively immortal, which he passed on to his estranged wife Adeline. Remember her? She just disappeared from the new Titans after Jericho's death, and a blood transfusion that subsequently made her immortal too. Also, for some reason, Beast Boy is now here. Yeah, I don't get it either. I thought it would be explained in that Beast Boy miniseries I mentioned before, but nope. That one ends with him and Flamebird walking off into the sunset in Los Angeles. He's just there now for this three-parter and the next issue without any explanation. I guess it was just a matter of Nightwing calling him up and saying, "Hey, dude, that villain who we have a complicated relationship with stopped by. Can you come over? Thanks. Oh, and bring pizza." Since this was before Deathstroke once again became mega-villain in Identity Crisis, he's still on relatively good terms with the team and is asking for their help in tracking down Tartarus. Nightwing even gives him one of his old costumes to replace the crappy 90s one that had hubcaps as shoulder pads. You think I can't hear the tracer on this thing humming, kid? Nightwing's response is great. You think I'd let you Shanghai my team without insurance? Nobody trusts you that much, Deathstroke. Get used to it. I mean, sometimes you help us, sometimes you betray us, and sometimes you inexplicably are able to defeat the entire Justice League single-handedly, except for Green Arrow, who sticks a broken arrow in your eye socket. You know, I just realized that our lives are very weird. Some other subplots move along too. I haven't been talking about it, but Cyborg has been feeling really uncomfortable in the Omegadrome as a body. He feels even less human now than he was back in the old days with technology sticking out of him, and now he has a body that lets him stretch out and grab a pencil in another room. So here's the plot of the three-parter. The Hive and Tartarus are operating out of a country called Zandia, which has appeared before in the Titans as basically being a nation that's a haven for international criminals and terrorists. The Hive's plan is to create a massive crisis in Zandia, bomb waterways and power plants and lots of disasters, and force as many superheroes as possible to come to the country to assist the civilian population. Once the majority of superheroes are there, they'll nuke the place and kill almost all superheroes in the world. Tartarus is there to capture the Hive Mistress, deploying killer robots to that effect. We discover that the Hive Mistress is in fact Adeline Wilson, Deathstroke's ex-wife and Jericho's mother.
What a twist!
Tartarus wants her because the blood transfusion I mentioned before made her immortal too, except her blood type is O, which makes her a universal donor. Vandal Savage wants to synthesize her blood into a universal serum that can be sold as an immortality elixir. However, to store the blood, he needs the assistance of Cyborg's Omegadrome body. As such, he lures Cyborg away with the promise of giving him a full human body, which sadly he's tempted by. The Titans, disorganized by all the recent events and the double loyalties, are unable to keep things under control, especially after Grodd slits Adeline's throat to try to force Cyborg to make a choice. With Adeline suffering terribly as she dies, begging Deathstroke to just let her die, Starfire incinerates her as a mercy killing, much to the shock of everyone else. Cheshire is also wounded badly, and Arsenal has to try to get her medical attention. And during all of this, the bomb is finally dropped, and we get to see Nightwing at his most badass. He dives down and rides the nuke in an attempt to disarm it in midair! Okay, we already did this last week, but something that awesome deserves Nightwish again. However, Cyborg pushes him away since his body can probably disarm it faster but also contain the blast if he fails. Which he does, albeit he does survive and needs to hitch a ride into space later to dispose of the radiation. Because it's the Titans, of course they can regularly go into space. Tartarus gets away and Damien Darhk is stabbed, but was given the immortality transfusion by Adolin earlier, so he's still alive too, and taken into custody. As far as I know, we never see him again. So much for the new modern villain. Dark Flash even offers to help Arsenal take Cheshire to the hospital in a moment of true humanity from the guy, but he gets forgotten when Argent makes the same offer. Needless to say, things are not ending on the first year with a happy note, especially for poor Deathstroke, who has now lost everyone in his family. Well, except for his daughter, who goes nuts and cuts out her own eye in the 2003 series. Yay. Issue 13 is the fallout of all of this. Everyone is exhausted and the team is severely fractured. Tempest wants to get back to his wife, Nightwing and Starfire are ready to come to blows, Dark Flash is finally kicked off the team by Nightwing since he refuses to reveal who he is and thus can't be trusted, Arsenal just wants to go see Cheshire in the hospital, and Cyborg gets pissed off at Beast Boy and thinks everybody is always looking at him like he's gonna try to steal the moon again and decides to quit. Unfortunately, Nightwing says he can't quit, since he promised the JLA that if he was on the Titans, they could keep an eye on him. Cyborg seems to take this well, as he grabs Nightwing and almost tries to kill him. Although, this doesn't really gel with what we saw in issue 1. It was Tempest who suggested that he join the team, not Nightwing. Nightwing asks the team to think about if they're truly all willing to be dedicated to said team, and half of them leave to go do their own things and get some time to think. Things aren't made any better for Donna, too, since all of the team keeps trying to go to her for advice and to talk, and she snaps at everyone that she isn't their guidance counselor, and she's been having a sucky time, too. Jesse quits the team as well. As I brought up in the team history video, the group is incestuous and very reactionary, and all these little problems built up to the point where they weren't ready to handle them. Made worse is that Nightwing keeps his identity a close secret and hasn't shared it with her, and to be fair, after what happened with Tara, wouldn't you be a little more protective of your secrets? However, most of the team comes back together at the Red Lobster, or whatever, that they first formed the team at, and recognize that they're having problems, but things do seem to be getting better. However, before we can get back to that drama, it's time for a rescue mission. See, it turns out that a throwaway line made by Damien Darhk to Vandal Savage in issue 12 turned out to be true. I mean, what did you do? Kidnap some former Titan member and ask them to help you pick candidates for your team? And yeah, that's exactly what Vandal Savage did. He kidnapped Omen and forced her to use her psychic abilities to put together a team to fight the Titans. Just remember, Vandal Savage has enhanced intelligence! Tempest, receiving a psychic distress call from her, leads what's left of the group to rescue her. While being an awesome issue that focuses on Tempest's leadership abilities, it's also packed with lots of great humor, including a bit where Nightwing is talking to Batman and asking for advice because his life is so chaotic. Batman doesn't actually say anything, as Dick just rants and rambles about everything going on and just finally says, "Dick, I trust you'll make the right choice." And that just confuses Dick even more. What's great about this is that Batman clearly is listening to him, and it seems that he just knows that he needed to get all of that off his chest. They get Lilith out, and it turns out that she deliberately had Vandal Savage pick out team members who would be at each other's throats. And it works, since Tartarus basically destroys itself when they start fighting each other. Issues 15 and 16 are my favorite issues of the entire run. The original 5 Titans go off together, per Donna's order, on a camping trip for the weekend to try to force them back together. Oh, and Wally had returned as the Flash by this point, and rekindle their friendship. None of them are really on board with it, and all the tension between them comes to a boiling point. Flash disappearing for a bit and being replaced, Arsenal and Tempest, and how Tempest keeps getting joked on for being a water breather, Flash and Donna over who she really is, you get the picture. All of them are ready to come to blows, and things aren't made any better when a monsoon hits them. Probably should have checked the weather reports for that. Tempest accidentally freezes the jet, meaning they can't escape the island, and Nightwing's continued attempts to make something to survive in are foiled, and they all just keep reminding him of being trained by Batman and calling him Batboy and saying, "Batman would have had this solved already." Nightwing finally locates a cave, and it looks like he's leading them to it, but in what is probably my favorite moment of the entire book, plants a bomb on the entrance to the cave when he's inside, and gleefully proclaims, "Would Batman do this?" and blows it up, sealing himself inside away from the others. However, inside the cave is revealed their true enemy, the Gargoyle. Yep, remember him? He's still out for revenge on the Titans, and with his powers, he was able to exacerbate their conflicts with one another. Sure, they are angry at each other, but they're family. They'd normally be fine and figure this stuff out. He just nudged them into the right direction and then sends them into a limbo state. Roy is the one who's able to break through the limbo state more than the others, and Dick gets them all to apologize to one another and try to settle their differences, since the Gargoyle admits that they've been in such a limbo state for the last few months that it didn't take much to push them. However, what does finally break them free is Roy punching Dick. What, don't you remember Rise of Arsenal? Hitting your friends is the greatest sign of friendship. Well, okay, it's more about the nature of limbo. It's stagnation and status quo. They weren't getting out of it because they were doing what they always did, kiss and make up. By Roy punching Dick and breaking the cycle and letting out everything that was bugging him, it allowed them to escape. Issues 17, 18, and 19 are a three-parter that has team members permanently leaving. They receive a distress call from Starfire's brother, who needs the Titans' help in securing another homeworld for the Tamaranians. Oh yeah, that new homeworld that they established at the end of the New Titans, that got blown up too! What the hell is it with Starfire and her home planet blowing up? Does she get a free coupon or something after her homeworld is destroyed a certain number of times? Damage goes on a trip with Arsenal and Leanne to the Indian reservation where Arsenal grew up, and we discover that Damage was actually physically and sexually abused as a child. He leaves to stay with the tribe and hopefully work out his problems, while we discover that Starfire and her group are actually invading the world of the Gordanians, the ones who originally enslaved Starfire. Thanks to Tempest, they actually negotiate to allow the Tamaranians to stay on their world, but Starfire has to remain there as a peace envoy. Using a weak connection, Starfire and Nightwing say goodbye to each other and admit that they love each other, but it's unclear if either hears it. Reboot or no reboot, I still hold out hope that those two crazy kids will someday make it work. What about Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon? What about Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon? Nightwing also helps convince Jesse to rejoin the team as we lead into issue 20, where Flash and Cyborg leave. Why is Cyborg leaving? Well, Nightwing, with Jesse's assistance, manages to get the Russians who rebuilt Cyborg and the New Titans to cough up the samples of Vic's DNA that they had. With Red Star's help, they clone a human body for him and, thanks to the Omegadrome, can transfer him into it. He still has the Omegadrome, but he looks human, which is what he really wanted to begin with. He becomes a supporting cast member on Flash's book until magic or something turns him back into his old cyborg body. Because screw you, character development. Issues 21 and 22 are the Trial of Cheshire, who's still in police custody after what happened in the Immortal Coil. Of course, even though it's called the Trial of Cheshire, she is not actually on trial in the issues. It's more about advancing Roy's relationship with her. I should note that this is the first issue where Jay Faerber is the solo writer of the book. Devin Grayson left because she was getting more and more work on her plate and was burning out, so she had to let go of the book. We'll get more into Faerber's run next time and the problems that plagued it, most of which are not his fault. Anyway, after a failed attempt to kidnap Leanne by some of Cheshire's enemies, Cheshire is attacked by Deathstroke, who was hired by a group of Kuraki who are still naturally pissed off about the whole her nuking their country thing. Arsenal manages to fight him off, just barely, but sustains heavy injuries as a result and Cheshire escapes. However, during this we also get the hint of a new villain emerging, Epsilon. Again, something we'll get into next time. Speaking of subplots started, Jesse Quick's mother, the former Liberty Bell, stops by to inform her daughter that she's getting married. More stuff to get into next time. Next time is gonna be a big thing, isn't it? Anyway, the fight with Deathstroke is actually a real highlight. It's clear that Roy is out of his league against him, but he manages to hold his own really damn well, even getting a few hits in. Is this a thing now? Roy Harper actually doing incredibly well against bad guys who otherwise take out entire groups of heroes? Prometheus, Deathstroke? Dude's gonna take on Darkseid on his own one of these days. Nightwing discovers that Chanda gave Cheshire's location to the Kurakis, but they can't really deal with that right away since we lead into the three-parter that ends the first half of the series. Who is Troya? Everyone's memories of Donna are erased, along with any records that would indicate who the hell she is, and naturally the Titans are suspicious of her. She runs off to try to figure things out on her own, while Chanda quits to try to protect Leanne from harm. Who's responsible for this? Dark Angel, of course! Seriously? Dark Angel? Really with that name? Dark Angel attacks, but fortunately Donna does have backup. The Titans from the Kingdom Come universe. It seems Dark Angel has been moving from one reality to the next, erasing Donna Troy's existence from each one. The Teen Titans from the Kingdom Come universe were recruited by Zeus to fix this, not only because Donna Troy is special to him, but also because this disruption in hypertime could cause all the different realities to collapse in on each other. Apparently, even the knowledge of Hypertime's existence can be disastrous, so they can't reveal who they are to the Titans, instead claiming to be a team of government agents. Actually, it was editorial mandate, but whatever. These Titans are pretty much the children of the group, including Donna Troy's still-living son, the daughter of Starfire and Nightwing, a grown-up Leanne, and I just remembered that this future will never happen because of Cry for Justice, so I hope whoever made that decision gets salt poured into their eyes. A daughter for Tempest, although in this reality he has a son, and Kid Flash, the daughter of Wally West and his wife Linda. Speaking of the Flash, though, he does remember Donna because of the events of the last time Dark Angel attacked, and thus sets out to help the others. As Hypertime continues to destabilize, Dark Angel and different incarnations of her from other realities go back through time to try to kill Donna at various points of her life. Basically, the story was meant to bring final resolution to Donna Troy's history, and it doesn't really succeed in that regard. It's a bit of a mess, but a very enjoyable mess, which features a lot of guest artists and writers to celebrate. After Dark Angel is defeated, everyone's memories of the future Titans gets erased, and of course, party time, with Wonder Woman even describing Donna's powers. No mention is made of the whole ability to repel evil from the beginning of the series, but I would guess that it's just an extension of her command over truth or something. Like Wonder Woman, Donna Troy has that same ability as the spirit of it, but she just doesn't have a lasso that allows her to channel that power. Roy Harper recruits Rose Wilson to become the new nanny for Leanne, and Donna and Roy officially break up. And that's pretty much it for the first half of the Titans. There are problems with it, sure. There are problems in any book. But what I really loved about this series was the strong character dynamics and the ability of the characters to, yes, argue with each other, but they came out stronger as a result of it. I felt that the characters were actually advancing and getting better, that they were changing as a result of their experiences. And even in spite of that, there was still drama and lots of stories ahead of them to tell. It was just a really damn good book, and for me, being the first comic book that I was ever regularly picking up and reading, it was special to me. But for those of you who have been upset that this trip down memory lane hasn't contained enough of my rage, well, come back next week as March of the Titans concludes with the last 25 issues. And expect more than a little yelling.
Welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. Brodsky, you're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he's a man punch, wears a party hat. Linkara, he has a magic gun. Where'd he purchase that? Linkara,
Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. And here's where it all falls down. So outside of the main Titans book, there were three other things we should briefly go over. First is Titans Secret Files and Origins number 2, which had some more short stories and hints about storylines to come. That never came about. I'll get to that in a bit. But most prominent of all was a story about a new Titans West forming called Titans LA. It never really got off the ground, just like the other Titans West, which is odd since reading the behind the scenes, it seemed like there was actually quite a bit of enthusiasm to make it happen. Next up, the Titans had a brief special related to a crossover event centered around Young Justice called Sins of Youth, wherein the character Clarion the Witch Boy creates a spell that basically reverses everyone's ages. All the adults become teenagers, and all the teenagers become adults. The original Titans weren't affected because of some magic that had occurred in a previous story, but the other members got their ages switched out, with Damage in particular becoming a very serious-minded superhero in his own right, and showed his potential for greatness. What did happen, though, was that the group came across a new wildebeest society. The only difference being these wildebeests were actually animalistic creatures instead of people in suits. I don't think we ever really got resolution on where the hell they came from, though I believe that there were hints about it years and years later in both the 2003 Titans series as well as the Cyborg miniseries. The final thing of note was Titans Annual number 1, wherein the team rejoins Beast Boy and Flamebird in Japan to face off against a demon while teaming up with a new hero named Bushido. It was part of the theme of the annuals that year of introducing new international heroes, and Bushido even moved to the USA to join up with Titans LA. And then Jeff Johns killed him in Infinite Crisis. Although, to be fair, he did create Bushido, so okay. Although that doesn't make up for him killing Pantha in Infinite Crisis 2, because he thought killing her would develop Red Star's character. Hey, Jeff Johns, there's this thing called Women in Refrigerators that one of your peers wrote about and said was a bad thing. Perhaps you should read it sometime. But enough about Jeff Johns and his work with the Titans. Let's go back to my favorite team and the dark times it faced in its second half. So Jay Faerber co-wrote a number of issues with Devin Grayson, and when he was given the book, he had a big overview and plans for how the series was going to progress, like any good writer has. And most of it never ended up seeing the light of day. Behold the true villain of the Titans! Not Deathstroke, not Brother Blood, not Trigon, oh no. Andrew Helfer. Unlike the previous editor, Eddie Berganza, who was a huge fan of the Titans and knew their history inside and out, Andrew Helfer knew absolutely nothing about the Titans and, in fact, kept referring to them in his conversations with Jay Faerber by their previous names, i.e. Nightwing as Robin, Tempest as Aqualad, etc. Now, I don't expect non-comics readers to know stuff like that, since TV and movies still tend to have Dick Grayson as Robin, for example. But if you're an editor in this company, Dick Grayson hasn't been Robin for over 15 frickin' years by this point, so get your damn head in the game! Basically, most of the stories, for good or for ill, that Faerber had planned on doing got tossed aside for what Andrew Helfer wanted to do. Helfer's big problem was that he didn't get why the Titans needed to exist, what their mission statement was. Why the hell do they need one? It's a superhero book with a long history behind it, with rich character histories upon which to draw on for new stories. No one picks up Justice League and says, "Why does this need to exist?" But no, Helfer and Faerber threw out various ideas, and one of them, which wasn't even really taken seriously at the time, ended up becoming the big focus of the book for quite a while. We'll talk some more about it in a little bit, but I guess we should actually start discussing the comics themselves. So let's dig into The Titans number 26 through 50 and watch my favorite series fall apart. Issue 26 is a lot more down-to-earth superhero stuff after the time-traveling, interdimensional antics with Donna and the three-part before it. The plot, believe it or not, actually revolves around Titans Tower's lease. Titans together! We will defeat subprime mortgages! Basically, a group of business investors kidnap a supervillain's children to force him into assassinating the mayor of New York. Said mayor was a minor character in the New Titans, former New York Police Chief Jim Hall. He had been a big supporter of the Titans, and now that he's mayor, wants to keep up friendly relations with them. The lease for Titans Tower is up, and the mayor is naturally going to renew it for them, but the business investors want him dead and out of the way so they can buy up the property and turn it into a massive casino. The subplot revolves around Jessie Quick and her mom's fiancé. We finally meet the guy, and he's like 30 and planning to marry a woman twice his age. The subplot will get more development later on, in the worst possible way. We'll get to that. Otherwise, issue 26 is just an enjoyable done-in-one. Issue 27 is where things actually start on the road to the book's doom. You'll recall a guy I mentioned last week named Epsilon. Cheshire, having escaped from custody in issue 21, goes to look in on Leanne while she's playing with Rose. A bunch of Kiraki ninjas attack, because it's superhero comics, of course they have those, and Epsilon arrives, helps defeat the ninjas, and then takes her back into custody. However, mech suits piloted by the Department of Extra-Normal Operations, or DEO, think of them as a low-rent DC version of S.H.I.E.L.D., arrive to take him into custody. Since they won't explain themselves to the Titans, the heroes take them on and defend him, even inviting him back to the tower. Naturally, they're smart enough to remember that, well, every other time they've brought in stray superheroes, said superheroes end up betraying them. Spoilers, the same thing happens here. Except the details are a little different here, and they ask him to unmask. He seems to nervously stumble after that, but acquiesces, his personality changing. Argent is taken with him, and that begins a subplot of her attempts to romance him. And again, he's actually evil. Sort of. Seriously, the Titans seem to have an uncanny knack for its members falling in love with evil people. Beast Boy fell in love with Terra, Starfire fell for a guy who turned out to be a Hive agent, Arsenal and Cheshire, Raven had a brief fling with an emotional vampire, Mirage was in love with an evil alternate future Nightwing, who, ironically enough, when Epsilon first debuted, his costume made me think he was said alternate future Nightwing. Kid Flash was with a woman who had mental stability issues named Magenta, and now Argent for Epsilon. I also like Epsilon's look, by the way. The best costumes are always the simple ones, with that jacket and helmet. And before we get into what Epsilon's actual deal is, I want to talk about the original ideas for him. You know, before Andrew Helfer screwed them up. Epsilon appeared and fought alongside Troia when Dark Angel erased the world's memories of her. Except he actually recognized her, but feigned that he didn't afterwards. Why? Well, the first idea that they went with for him was that Epsilon was actually a dimension-hopping serial killer, going to different realities in hypertime and murdering heroes, hence why he could recognize Donna when the rest of the world didn't. That apparently got the kibosh put on it, probably by higher-ups in DC editorial, since they were also the negative Nancys who didn't want the Kingdom Come Titans to admit that they were the future children of the group. So Jay Faerber had a second idea for him that was even more awesome. Get this, Epsilon was actually going to be a reborn Danny Chase. Oh yeah! You can imagine how exciting that would have been for me. The idea was that a Tempest villain named Slizath, who was a sorcerer who he had fought in his own miniseries, had resurrected him as the advance man for his longer scheme, and that eventually all the dead Titans would get resurrected. Since Danny Chase was so hated, Faerber would prove that any character can be good if written the right way. Hell, in that second Secret Files and Origins issue, they even state that Slizath was going to be coming back soon. This was well in the works! But then Helfer came on board and tossed that awesome idea in the garbage. Wanna know what we got instead? Well, for that, I need to introduce you to the new stars of the Titans. Yes, seriously, behold these 5 children. These 5 frickin' children. These 5 kids end up on the island and they refuse to explain how they got there. The 5 all have superpowers that I will not get into because I refuse to dignify this stupid idea. And we learn in a later issue that they are also on the run from the DEO, leaving an orphanage because I have no idea. We never really get an actual reason why they didn't like being with the DEO, if they were abused or anything, just that they decided that going to the Titans and asking them to take care of them would be best. Andrew Helfer thought that the kids would get popular enough that they might even get their own mini-series. Or, in fact, a greater goal being that they would eventually supplant the actual Titans and become the Titans, and the real team would just kind of fade away. Oh, or get a spin-off. A spin-off from their own freaking book! Hey, pop quiz! Name any story where the entire cast gets replaced by new characters overnight, and those characters end up being more loved than the original. Time's up! Because that never happens! And don't bother pointing out examples where something like that happens, because I'll just find some way of pointing out how it's different from this. This is ridiculous! Some asshole with no understanding or respect for the actual characters of the book comes on, decides, yeah, I don't know anything about these characters, so we're gonna use these new characters instead, and expects people to embrace it with open arms? You know, when Harv Bennett was brought on as producer of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, he had never seen a single episode of the original series. So you know what he did? He watched every episode of the original series. Couldn't Andrew Helfer be bothered to actually read some of their history since he was going to be editing their book? And as for them getting more popular than the actual stars of the book, yeah, this was around the time I actually became involved with online fandoms concerning comic books, and I can assure you that at best, these kids were tolerated. I admit, there's not much to hate about them from a character standpoint. There's nothing unlikable about them, nothing that makes you want to punch them or anything like that. It's just that their presence was a distraction from the guys we actually wanted to read about. And so many damn issues got devoted to them and their shenanigans with the DEO that it was just unbearable, and we kept wanting them to go away, but they never did! Ugh. Anyway, issues 28 and 29 focus around the kids and trying to figure out who they are, while also starting a subplot about Tempest's marital problems since he spends so much time away from his wife and son. Ultimately, Dolphin decides to move into the tower to spend more time with him, which disappointed me when I initially read it, not because there isn't drama there, but rather I thought it was the Slizath plot finally coming to fruition. An abandoned plan was going to be that Dolphin was going to be a more active member of the Titans while Tempest became a stay-at-home dad, which I wouldn't have minded. It's good for the supporting cast to be more active in the book, especially if it's someone like her who already has extra abilities she could take into battle. We also begin another subplot about Argent taking some kind of vitamin drug called Apex. What the hell it actually does is unclear, but it seems to either enhance metahuman abilities or possibly grant them to people without any negative side effects. And yes, this isn't some kind of twist or something. This drug does not have any negative side effects. I'm serious. Anyway, they let the kids stay, and in issue 30, we finally get resolution on the trial of Cheshire. 8 issues after the trial two-parter. Despite the fact that Cheshire is found guilty by the United Nations for crimes against humanity, she isn't sentenced to death, just life imprisonment. During a prison riot, Cheshire has a chance to escape, but Arsenal finally decides to let go of her and not help her anymore. And then Brad Meltzer kind of screwed that over a few years later, but that's neither here nor there. Issue 31 advances the Epsilon plot, sort of. Epsilon finds a note in his jacket when Argent wants to take him out for shopping and seems confused by it. They arrive at a penthouse suite of a hotel that the note told him about, and we meet this lady, Theta. I'm pretty sure Theta was not in the original plans for Epsilon, and frankly, she doesn't make that much sense with the explanation they do go with. During a battle with her, his mind seems to flip back and forth between two personalities, and he asks Argent to just drop it afterwards. And Argent does for a while. even though she should be smarter than this. Isn't it fun when things that were stupid to begin with end up making even less sense as they progress? Issue 32 has the DEO revealing who the kids are, and the Titans keep them anyway, with Nightwing blackmailing the head of the DEO, a skeleton guy named Mr. Bones. Yes, seriously. Comic books! Also, the good Mr. Bones says that he has a plan that will make the kids want to come back. Ha 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 ha! Yeah, that never actually happens. He has no plan. We'll get to that. Issue 33 continues the Epsilon and Theta thing. It starts with Epsilon making out with Argent, much to his surprise, since she's still crushing on him. And hoo boy, I can't wait to tell you what his deal is, because it makes all of this really, really squicky. But anyway, while the Titans are off dealing with a rather lame crossover event at the time called Our Worlds at War, Argent is left to watch over the stupid DEO kids and writing a letter to her mother, since she hasn't really talked with her much since the whole getting her father arrested for drug trafficking thing. However, she still wants to figure out what the deal is with Theta, so she goes to the only other person still around, Rose Wilson, who is being badass and exercising. Rose is helpful, intelligent, and completely stable. And even seems a bit older, closer to 18 or 19. I bring this up because in the 2003 Teen Titans series, suddenly she has regressed a few years, gets drugged by her father, cuts out her own eye, and then becomes a cliched, I am the snarky team member who is also constantly pissed off, so I have to talk every single second, even when it's annoying and inappropriate character. Because why would we want nice, stable people around, No. Better to have characters moving backwards instead of forwards. It's DC's usual policy. Why do you think they reboot everything every few years? Theta tells Argent that her father hired her and Epsilon to infiltrate the Titans and destroy them from within. Argent confronts her father about it, but he denies it, and we never really find out if it's the truth or not, though it seems to be implied that it is. Argent has Lilith do a telepathic scan of Epsilon to see if that's the truth, and while his psychic wavelengths are a bit weird, she confirms his intentions are altruistic, and there is a reason for that. Oh, and speaking of crossover events, issue 34 is a tie-in to the Batman one happening at the time, Joker Last Laugh. The Joker was told that he was dying of cancer, he wasn't really, and thus he planned his final crime spree of using the toxin that turned him into the Joker on as many supervillains as he could find. This is nonsensical for a number of reasons, but the point is issue 34 is about a Jokerized Cheshire returning to attack Leanne and Jokerize her too. They of course stop her and cure both Cheshire and Leanne. It was an okay issue, even if most of the action involved the DEO kids fighting Cheshire. Yay! Issues 35 and 36 are a two-parter, and a pretty terrible one, unfortunately. The good part of it is the return of Beast Boy and Flamebird. But the reason they're in town is to recruit the DEO kids into becoming Titans West. Yes! Yes, Beast Boy, take them! Take them to the other side of the country! We don't want them! But no, they decide to stick around. Goody goody gumdrops. The subplot is basically them fighting off some remnants of the wildebeest creatures from the Young Justice event, and that's it. The main plot is the really frustrating one. Unfortunately, this was a story that Farber wanted to do, and while I have nothing but respect for him as a writer, since he is a talented guy, I recommend the series he made called Dynamo 5, for instance, this was just a bad idea. Remember that younger guy who Jesse Quick's mom was engaged to? Well, he turns up murdered in his bed. There's suspicion on Jesse's mother having killed him, since they learned that the guy was cheating on her. When they eventually find Jesse's mom, Jesse reveals that she was the one who he was sleeping with. Yeah, Jesse Quick was sleeping with her mother's young fiancé. She claims it was only for recreation, but a flashback shows she was really swept up by the asshole. And yeah, if the cheating wasn't enough, he was really only marrying her mother for money. And she says the reason why she didn't tell her mother about it was basically because she was a crappy mother and didn't know how these things work.
Yeah, it's up there, Barbie. That was one potent combination of verbal diarrhea and stunned silence.
What a load! Jesse has been shown to be intelligent, thoughtful, and knew the freaking difference between right and wrong! If I really have anything to criticize about Fairbur's run that was his fault, it's that I don't think he really got Jesse quick. I've been getting most of the behind-the-scenes info from the Titans companion books, and he paints Jesse as being the outsider of the group, who didn't have the same kind of relationship to the others that Nightwing did. That's all well and good, but the way he portrayed it in the series was, well, as kind of a real jackass. She was abrasive, impatient, angry, and just unlikable. Her lamer costume didn't help. And if you're wondering who really murdered the guy, it was a Golden Age hero. Hooray, a hero turning villain. That's what we needed. The beginning of the end for the team started with issues 37 and 38, where we finally get an explanation about Epsilon. Mostly. Okay, there was another kid who was with the DEO kids in the orphanage, but he couldn't come with them because he was wheelchair-bound. However, he's apparently a young Professor X or something because he actually has incredible psychic power. Enough to take over Epsilon's body. He has been the one who is in the driving seat most of the time. Which means that Argent has basically been making out with a 13-year-old boy. Now, they never state Argent's age at the time of this, but they do reveal that she's under 21 in any event, so chances are it's still squicky. What's more, his ability to possess is shaking due to being out of his body for so long, and Epsilon's real personality breaks through, and he violently attacks and destroys Titan's tower. Epsilon was also at the orphanage with the DEO kids for a while, but when he was of age, he left. Also, it turns out that Nightwing has known all about Epsilon actually being psychotic for a while now, and in fact knew his backstory, but didn't tell the other Titans because he wanted to be sure his suspicions were correct before telling them. Gee, it's not like they've ever had trouble with evil team members or Nightwing keeping secrets. Oh, wait!
There is logic in what he says.
Well, this all makes perfect sense then. Except if Epsilon was always psychotic, how did he meet up with Theta? Why did they go with the Greek numbers theme for their costumes and powers? Why does Theta own a regular suburban house? Did she live with Epsilon? If Psychic Kid was able to discern that Epsilon was actually evil and psychotic, does that mean he had access to Epsilon's knowledge, thoughts, and feelings? If so, why did he always seem so surprised whenever he switched out bodies with him, and in turn surprised by the stuff going on with Theta? Why didn't he warn the other DEO kids about how dangerous Epsilon was? If he had this power of possession, why didn't he just get the guards to let him out along with the other DEO kids, and they could carry him to the island the same way they got there? What happened when Epsilon needed to sleep? Why did Epsilon keep freezing up during fights? If the DEO were raising Epsilon, why didn't they catch his psychotic tendencies earlier? The DEO have been established as highly observant assholes. Why wouldn't they have been spying on him and keeping tabs when he left the orphanage? Why were they pursuing Epsilon to begin with? And why didn't they just tell the Titans that Epsilon was a criminal? They had multiple opportunities to tell the Titans this. Why did Epsilon recognize Troya when no one else did during the Dark Angel stuff? Was Epsilon aware that he was being possessed? He seemed pretty confused anytime he got control again. And if that's the case, then why did he suddenly know that he was possessed in the end storyline for this? Why was Nightwing being a complete dumbass and not telling the other Titans about how dangerous he was if he had been coordinating with the DEO? He seemed to not know about the Psychic Kid possessing him, so he must have thought it was Epsilon hanging out with the DEO kids as himself. Wouldn't he warn the kids away to protect them? If he thought he was dangerous, why the hell did they let Epsilon pretty much move into the tower power with them. Where the hell was Epsilon sleeping this whole time anyway? Did he ever sleep with Argent? Because if they did, then that is wrong on so many levels I don't even know where to start.
It just raises too many questions.
The psychic kid dies in the ensuing fight, and Argent, still pissed off about the whole thing, actually seems kind of happy he's dead. The parade of likability just keeps on going. And we never see Epsilon and Theta ever again. The DEO kids are taken back by the DEO since the Titans' headquarters is trash and they can't live there anymore. And thus Bones' plan to get back the kids was a complete success. My favorite part of his plan was how he... So, what convinced them to finally lose the DEO kids? Well, we can thank Barry Kitson, the artist, for that. He was also a big Titans fan, while also being a friend of Andrew Helfer, and basically told him the DEO kids thing was stupid. However, by that point, the damage was done. Issue 39 did not improve things. A lot of former Titans and the JSA show up and offer to help rebuild their headquarters, which is really good. But Nightwing acts like a dick to Beast Boy and gets him to leave, before then telling all the heroes that he appreciates the offer. But before we rebuild, we need to refocus on who we are, what we stand for, and how we operate. That's frickin' stupid, Nightwing! That is remarkably stupid! Refocus on who you are? Oh yeah, let's find our focus in the rubble and burnt out cinders that were our headquarters instead of having these wonderful people who took time out of their lives to stop by, help rebuild your place free of charge. What's wrong with you, dumbass? Let them build you a headquarters. You have 3 people with super speed here. You will have a new headquarters in an hour. Gah! Tempest, being smarter than Nightwing, does start making sketches on a new headquarters, and Dolphin even says that she understands how important his work is, and she'd follow him anywhere. Gee, I wonder if that will be a complete contradiction of what happens a few issues later when there's a different writer on the book. So, time to work on that plot with Apex, and that's the focus of issues 39 through 44. Yeah, 6 issues, and it's confusing, irritating, and dumb. So it turns out the guy who's been selling the Apex drug, named Donovan, is actually from another dimension. He's selling the drug to help assemble an army of metahumans to return to his dimension and help free his world, which is controlled by the Pharmocracy, basically a pharmaceutical corporation that keeps the population under control with drugs. One of the agents of the Pharmocracy got to Earth and ended up accidentally getting trapped inside one of the DEO kids, just roll with it, who has displayed telekinetic powers, and they kept describing her as autistic, but since I don't know anything about autism, it's possible that they were actually being horribly offensive, and I just don't know. And frankly, I don't care, since when they get the guy out of her head, he wants the Titans to come back to his dimension to stop Donovan, not mentioning the whole working for the Umbrella Corporation or anything. But in the other dimension, they're drugged and taken control of, Tempest gets hit by some nasty drugs while still on Earth, and Star Labs manages to save his life. But when he expresses concern for the Titans, Dolphin is pissed off about it and runs off. If this whole situation wasn't bad enough, Jay Faerber left the series halfway into the storyline, and new writer Tom Payer had to finish up everything. Because changing writers in the middle of a storyline was exactly what this book needed. Nightwing continues to act like a dick during this. Accidental pun. Keeping secrets, making Tempest hold a portal open while he digs around in the ruins of their headquarters for supplies. Hey, you know what would have been a really great idea, Nightwing? Letting the heroes build you a new headquarters. And generally just being a jerk. They find Donovan, who claims that his followers came of their own free will and he can free everyone of their addiction with some gas compound he made. But then he gets assassinated and all the followers say they were actually under mind control, and Arsenal decides to free everyone of addiction anyway because of his own drug problems in the past, and then everyone goes home and they never mention it again. And if it seems like the storyline is kind of confusing and frustrating, it's only because it is. Issues 45 and 46 are mostly about the Titans working on clearing up the tower, while Jesse Quick goes to help out Damage. There have been ghost sightings in the desert near the reservation, and Damage wanted some help investigating. The rest of the Titans join up later, meeting some kind of group of spiritual creatures called the Phantasmagoria. We never really learn what their deal is, especially since the ending page reveals they've got thousands of glass capsules with dead people inside of them. Oh, hey there, Hitler. How's that working out for ya? Barry Kitson said that he had to write the two-parter because of deadlines and Tom Payer was behind on writing. With the reboot, it's unlikely we'll ever figure out just what the hell was going on in these issues. And thus we come to the final 4 issues. The Titans are trying to fix the tower by themselves, and eventually Donna gets sick of their constant failure, and they decide to have Tempest just buy them a new one. Remember, he was the one who financed the headquarters thanks to Undersea Treasure. Unfortunately, Dolphin has completely turned around and states that he has to leave the team. Which he does, so they're out of luck on him financing the new headquarters. To make matters worse, a military general stops by to inform them that Starfire has apparently gone nuts and started attacking satellites, military targets, and broadcast towers around the globe. And she's wearing tinfoil on her head. Yeah. As it turns out, an alien force called the Consensus. Did I also mention that Tom Payer had been told the book was being cancelled when he was writing the storyline? Is trying to take over the world with hypnotic suggestion and subliminal messages, and the tinfoil really does protect you from their mind control powers. Basically, it's the plot of They Live, but without Roddy Piper and kind of lamer. They beat the Consensus, which turns out to be the Zerg from StarCraft, and that's the end of the series. Yep, a 4-part, kinda boring alien invasion storyline. That is how my favorite book ended, and didn't have any actual resolution in it. No. We had resolution in the 3-part miniseries Titan/Young Justice Graduation Day, which killed both Lilith and Donna Troy, then formed the 2003 Teen Titans and the Outsiders. It was a truly awful comic, and I will be reviewing it one of these days. But yeah, that's the Titans, for good and for ill, all 50 issues. Even though I complained a lot in this episode, I still enjoyed reading all of this stuff, and enjoyed seeing all of this again, even the half that wasn't as good as the first. So what was the point of all of this? In 2011, the DC Universe rebooted once again, more or less. However, as reprints of those early issues came out, especially in trade paperbacks, there was a clear focus on eliminating that the Titans had ever existed before said reboot, that all of these things that happened had ever really happened. 250 plus comics, spread out over 40 years of stories, were effectively considered as not having happened. All of those events, for good and for bad, were considered not worth saving, not worth preserving, not worth reminding people that they had ever happened at all. And of course, these stories are still available to find, be it through illegal means like torrents, or legitimate ways like back issues or trade paperbacks or Comixology. Though for some reason, this run of the Titans isn't available there for some reason. But at the same time, the attitude of any reboot seems to be, sorry if you liked these things that happened before, but now they never happened. Doesn't matter if you were emotionally invested, it never happened. Now we're gonna tell the same stories, but not as good, or possibly even worse than before. It's the equivalent of your beloved pet dying and then your parents or whatever telling you, that's okay, we'll get you a new one. They don't understand that it's not about having a dog or whatever, it's about having this particular thing and the uniqueness of it. These were my Titans. And don't take this to mean that I can't accept change or that I have a Superboy Prime attitude of, everything was better with my Titans. I accept that I'll never see this group again the way I loved it and grew up with it. But I also know that the stories can be good again. I know that you can celebrate that history while telling new stories that are just as good. Just because it's new doesn't mean that everything that came before it should be thrown out. You know what taught me that? A little comic called The Titans. The March of the Titans has ended, but the stories will live on. Titans together. Seriously, I just want to know what was going through Dick's head here. Oh man, my girlfriend was just brutally attacked and my wedding destroyed. I'd better put on my Nightwing costume, but stop halfway. Or was I already in my Nightwing costume and I decided to put on pants for no real reason?
Hello my friends, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications on new video releases. If you'd like to support future videos, you can check out my Patreon or purchase a t-shirt via Teespring or Shark Robot. Thanks for watching!